Hello and welcome to today's episode. We will be discussing the year in gaming of 2006 and all the great things that year brought us. But before we do that, we'll do our typical relay of gaming where we'll select three games at random and discuss them, along with touching base on some modern gaming news. We had a lot that happened this week, so we had a Nintendo Direct, so I want to cover a little bit about that as well. And then we'll get into the meat of it all, right, with 2006 in video game history. We had two new consoles that launched this year, along with the seventh generation getting going on some games that started showing us what this generation can bring. It's all pretty exciting stuff, so we'll get into it here. So starting with Relay of Gaming, so I'm doing things a little bit differently here as I'm recording this segment as I'm driving to work. So I already had the games picked out that I chose earlier, so I'll start discussing them here now. And so the first game that I selected was for Grand Theft Auto 2. So not the ones that started becoming popular, but the one right before it. And this one, I don't recall if it was this one or maybe part one, but I remember me and my brother, we rented one of them. Let's see, because this would have been, yeah, it would have been around, because Grand Theft Auto 2 came out in 1999, I believe. And so we rented it around that time. Again, it's either part one or part two. And what I know about it is that it's a top-down, open world game, I guess you could say. And the like the cityscape and all that is polygonal. It's a pretty cool effect, as you can see, like, the way the skyscrapers move and all, right, as, with the 3D effect. And so you're walking around with this kind of look, I believe it's like a CGI looking character. And, just kind of the same as Grand Theft Auto, really, the newer ones where, you're getting an objective, carrying it out. These objectives have to do with criminal activity of some sort. And, you can still steal cars, obviously. The controls on it, though, aren't, they're a little hard to get into. But what I do remember was just my brother and I, when we first rented this game, like I said, it was either this one or the second one. I'm sorry, or the first one. But we were just laughing the whole time. It's just how silly the concept was. And I think we had a few drinks also too while we were playing it, so we just thought it was hilarious. So we got some fun out of it for that, right? And we just thought it was funny that you're playing like this, up and coming criminal, and it was just hilarious to us. We used to get like into this. We just thought it was funny. We would steal like a truck and then start listening to country music in it, and then while we're carrying out criminal activity, we just thought it was hilarious. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I would say that what I recall of it, I mean, I don't think I played enough of it to really give it a full, thorough review. But what I recall is that it's a fun little novelty, right, and all, but definitely don't expect something on the lines of like even Grand Theft Auto 3 and going forward, right? Grand Theft Auto 3 is where the series really took off, right? Where the first two, they were just experimenting with things. And so I wouldn't say they're quite as good, right? But like I said, you'll still get some enjoyment out of them. But the next game I picked was Resident Evil 4. And so this is the original one that came out back on the GameCube, and then eventually on the same year in 2005 for the PlayStation 2. And so I just talked about this game already pretty extensively in my previous podcast as I was talking about the year of 2005 in gaming. But just to touch base on this here again, this game's absolutely amazing. Not quite my favorite Resident Evil game, as that still goes to Resident Evil 2, but definitely, I would say probably the funnest Resident Evil game is. I do see myself coming back to this game quite a bit. The reason it's not quite my favorite, though, is because when I think of Resident Evil, I want more of a scare factor to it. And while this game can be a little scary and it's definitely gory and, has monsters, zombies, ganados, and, well, zombie-like creatures, I can say, and, huge monsters and whatnot, it's not quite as scary, though, as some previous Resident Evil games. And so for me, that's why Resident Evil 2, and whether if it's the original one on the PlayStation or the new remake that they came out with, that's still going to be the best Resident Evil game for me. But this one is still amazing, though. And even though they amped up the action into it, it still has a lot of intensity as, when you get all these ganazos coming after you, it's pretty horrifying still in a way, in its own way. But because it is more action oriented, you do get a lot of cool action set piece moments, and there's so many memorable moments in this game, and it really was revolutionary in making you what it did for like third person shooters, right? Because any game that would have attempted this beforehand were a little clunky. They didn't really quite get the controls right, or even the camera and all the targeting or how you can aim at your enemies. And this one really set a lot of foundations for a lot of those games going forward. Just the targeting in the game is just really fun. And even though you can't run and shoot in the, it's still pretty engaging still though, where you feel like you still have a good sense of control right on where you're aiming at the enemy, as that becomes a big part of the game, right? As you know, you get all these ganados come in after you. Do you want to shoot them in the leg? You want to shoot them in the head, as to help you, advance eventually. But great level designs, and there's so much variety in the overall structure of the game that it keeps the game pretty refreshing, which is great because it's actually a fairly long game, right? I mean, this game, you're looking at about 12 to 14 hours or so, give or take, when you first play through it. And so it's a bit on the longer side as to compared to like previous Resident Evil games before it. But you're having a lot of fun throughout the whole stretch there. And like I mentioned also too, as I talked about the game in my previous episode, that it was also one of the few games too that I felt that really emphasized on the need for widescreen in video games, because having that widescreen really give you a better view of all the enemies coming after you, and it felt like it was pretty much necessary, as a lot of games before this, right, were 4:3. I mean, we did have some games that were coming out on widescreen, before this, but it felt like this is the one that really made a big push towards having games be put in widescreen. The GameCube version had the two black bars on the top and the bottom still, so like they were letterbox still, like kind of like you see like when you're watching a movie in widescreen at home. But eventually they were able to get rid of those black bars, but still have the widescreen view though. And so just makes it for a really nice looking game, definitely one of the better looking games. And even though the GameCube lost its exclusivity on this title here, it was a bit of a bummer for Nintendo for that, because it was kind of a killer app for their system on the GameCube at the time. But at the same time, I mean, a game like this, it was so good that I feel like, Capcom probably just said, like, we need to have this game out on, as much systems as possible, which eventually they kind of got granted that, as this game's been ported over so many times, like to more modern consoles. There's even a really excellent VR version of this game too that I've gotten a little ways into. And outside of the motion sickness and all that I get after playing it for a bit, it's really a fun version to play. So I would say that if you are, if you have VR, it's an interesting version to play for sure. If I do recall, though, I think there was a few things that were censored from it. Like, I want to say, I think some of Leon's dialogue was censored, like little quips that he makes and all right. I believe that they removed them from this one, if I recall right. But either way, though, the VR version is really great too. But however you choose to play it, this is a very fun game. Very just an overall great game. I mean, it's noted as one of the best games of all time for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, and it's, I mean, just, once you start playing it, right, you can definitely see why. It's just really that good. But then the next game I selected was one that I'm just not really familiar with, and that's going to be Super Adventure Island on the Super Nintendo. As much as I know, on this game, I believe it was developed by Hudson Soft, and it came out fairly early, I believe, in the Super Nintendo's lifetime, and was, what I do know, though, is that it was a game that was, kind of really exemplified what the Super Nintendo did really well, was taking games from the Nintendo, because there was Adventure Island on there, and really made it just more popular, or not maybe necessarily more popular, but just better, right? Better graphics, better overall, but also keeping the same formula as the previous one. What I believe that, so there was, because there was the original Wonder Boy game, and then Adventure Island. I don't know which one came first, but those first two games there were kind of the same, where you're like this island boy or island man, and you're throwing these hammers and trying to stop some enemies as you move forward in this island setting. Well, eventually the Wonder Boy games kind of went in a different direction, where they went a little bit more fantasy medieval like, where the Adventure Island games kind of stuck to the same thing. And I believe there's at one point where you can get like a skateboard on it, and also definitely doesn't take itself too seriously from what I understand. But I remember the game getting pretty decent reviews in magazines back in the day, so I'd be curious to at least get some more information on these. So with these three games here, right, typically what I'll do is I'll put them on my YouTube channel, I'll record some gameplay footage of them, and just talk a little bit about them, because I'll do a little bit of research and at least jot down like who developed the game, when it was released, and just some background information on him. And so I'll be interested in getting some more information on this one and Grand Theft Auto 2 for this week's YouTube Shorts. And Resident Evil 4, well, I'll have enough to say on that one. I'm really familiar with that game, and I just absolutely love it. But those I will have on my YouTube channel on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. As for Sunday, I'm going to put a football game of some sort on my YouTube short there. I haven't quite decided which one yet, so I might, I'll have to think about that one. But, just basically in celebration for the Super Bowl. And who's everyone going for? I'm personally, I'm going to go for Seattle. I have a lot of friends that cheer for Seattle, so they're kind of my second team in a sense. And I'm from the state of Washington, so, they're kind of like the local team as well. So I would say that that's the team I'm going to go for there. But either way, hopefully it's at the very least a very good game. But that's what I got here for this section of Roulette of Gaming. And so next up, I did want to touch base a little bit on some of the stuff that came out on the Nintendo Direct. And so I try to keep up with it as much as I could, but, honestly, as I was looking through it and all, there wasn't a whole lot that interested me. It is what it is. I don't know. With Nintendo, it's crazy because, I think that there's always like this wild, crazy speculation on what's going to happen. And then, what the games that are going to get released, and then if nothing comes out that is like earth-shattering, it's like it was a complete flop and all that. And I would say I don't think it was like the best Direct and all, but there was some decent stuff on there at the very least, and some somewhat confusing stuff. But let's get into it here. So there was this game called Orbital, which looks interesting. I like the artwork to it, as it looks a bit like almost like the 80s anime, and it looks like it's a co-op game, so kind of in the lines of like It Takes Two. So I'm curious about that game. I'll see what it's all about. I don't know if something I'd be rushing out to get, but I'm curious to see what it's all about at the very least. But one news that I did like, and something that, it's cool. It's I was almost a little unnecessary, but I'm certainly not going to complain. But Hollow Knight got a Switch 2 version. And so basically, from what I understand, if you have the Switch 2, it gives it some, I think it will now run at 120 frames per second, and maybe, or an increased resolution if you keep it at 60. It's my thought, because I think it's basically giving you the same graphical settings like in Hollow Knight 2 or the Silksong one. But I saw the announcement, but I haven't really seen like what exactly the patch did for it. So I just got on my Switch and I just did the update on it, right? Just so it's ready to go whenever I wanted to check it out. But, cool. I'm not going to complain against that. But probably the biggest news, though, that came out, at least for me, and I'm sure for probably a lot of people, it was already kind of expected, but it's cool to know now, is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out on June 3rd of 2026 on the Switch 2. And also, because the trailer came out later, also on for the Xbox as well. So, yeah, there's, Square Enix is really getting this game out there to the masses, right, to try to get it going. And so that's pretty cool. So now that we know this, so we have the official date of Rebirth, and that they're all coming out, that they're coming out at the same time as the Xbox. And then also that I believe Hamaguchi has come out, I think that's his name. Oh God, did I get his name wrong? But the director of the Rebirth, and also a remake, he's come out saying pretty much that they want the games to be on, to be released simultaneously now on, well, I'm assuming on PlayStation, Xbox, Switch 2, and PC. So no more like a staggered release anymore. So my thought is this: if that's the case, right? So if they're gonna release Part 3 on all three systems at the same time, and now that we got the announcement of Rebirth, right, that it's coming out on the 3rd for the other systems outside of PlayStation, then I'm thinking that a little bit after those games come out is when we're finally going to get some kind of a major announcement for the Part 3 in the remake trilogy. I'm going to say I don't know if they've already announced like the date for the Summer's Games Fest and all, but somewhere along the lines of that. So I'm going to say maybe around July or so. Maybe they want to let people get through Rebirth a bit, right? And then after that, they're going to hit us with the trailer. Sometime in the summer is my guess. And so then still, I'm still shooting for like a 2007 release. Given that though, I don't know. I don't know if it'll make it like a like a springtime release. Maybe it might be closer to the summer, but we'll see. But either way, that's kind of what I'm anticipating on that there. But from what they showed in the trailers, anyways, now again, these trailers are very carefully curated, right? So, we won't know how well the game actually runs until, we get our hands on it. And it looked good, though, from what it showed in the trailers, right? I mean, it's going to run at 30 frames per second, obviously, but it still looked pretty good, though. So, yeah, I mean, and again, you're getting the Switch 2 version because you like the portability of it more than likely, right? Or maybe it's the only system you have. But I don't think that you get it because you're expecting the highest end version on the Switch 2. But if they can get it to run pretty good, that'd be pretty impressive. And I think they did come out. At least I saw somebody post this, that the file size was going to be like around 100 gigabytes, I believe, 110 maybe. So either one, it wasn't that much bigger than what's already on the Switch 2 for Remake, which is like at about 90 gigabytes. So that's kind of cool that they kept it, the file size fairly low, all things considered. Let's see. But then another announcement that was made, let's see, I'm just going to my notes here. And just another thing about this is, if you're someone that has not, and I'm probably late in saying this for the few of you that maybe this might matter to, but if you're someone that hasn't played Final Fantasy VII, nor Remake or let's just say you're on the Nintendo Switch, right? That's been your system, and now you got the Switch 2, and now you're finally playing Remake for the first time, and then, you saw the announcement of Rebirth now, and you're pretty excited about it. You probably already have, but try not to look at the trailer, though, for the new one that came out, right, for launching on the Xbox or the Switch, because there's a major moment that they showed towards the end that spoils a lot. And so I was like, oh man, I don't know if they should have done that. But I guess I get it. They're, trying to get, people hyped up for this. But I don't know. I feel like that spoiled quite a bit, though. But just FYI, I'm probably late in trying to give any kind of a warning on that. But, well, there it is. Pragmata was shown, though, and so this is a game from Capcom, and I haven't really seen a whole lot of gameplay stuff on this game, so I guess I'm not really sure what it's all about still, really. People have been really raving, though, that it looks really excellent on the Switch too. So it just sounds like the Resident Evil engine seems like it's been really user friendly to develop on, as they've been able to get games running like at 60 frames per second on lower end hardware, right? Because we were using the Resident Evil engine on, starting on the Xbox One and on the PlayStation 4. And so that's what Pragmata seems to be running on. And so it's running at 60 frames per second fairly consistently from what I understand. So yeah, people seem to be pretty impressed about that. But then there was also this Turok Origins game that was announced, which seems to be like you can switch between third person and first person shooter. And this one seems to be kind of more, I don't know, they seem to take away some of the sci-fi elements of it, but you're still duking it out with dinosaurs. And so you can go into first person and third person view. And so it seems like there's some pretty cool online options on there that you can do as playing co-op and whatnot. So, interesting, right? It looked interesting. So not something I would be curious to really play multiplayer, but just kind of curious to see how that game turns out. And it's scheduled to be released in, let's see, the fall of 2026. But then, this is a series that is, again, it's one of my blind spots in my gaming gameplay or experience history, and that's for Monster Hunter Stories, or really any Monster Hunter game. Excuse me, but this one was for Monster Hunter Stories 3, Twisted Reflection. So it has a very anime aesthetic to it, and looks like it's coming out in March 13th of 2026 for people that are interested. And I want to say that I think for all the Capcom games, well, aside from Resident Evil 9, which we'll touch base on later, I think they all have a demo too also. So, you can check out. But then came kind of this weird announcement, which, I'm not complaining. It's just, I guess I'm not sure what exactly they're doing with it. But so we've had the Arcade Archives lineup of releases, right, that have been coming out, like, for example, on the Switch, and then also, I believe, on the Xbox and PlayStation. And so it's pretty cool, right, because they, throughout the Switch's lifetime and, the other systems as well, too, they've been releasing a lot of, like, arcade games. And some of them a little bit more on the obscure side. And so, which is pretty cool, right? I've gotten several games from there, and it's, just kind of cool, right, that they've been doing that, too, again, for preservation's sake, right, on some games, and that otherwise we probably wouldn't have had another re-release on. But since the Switch 2 came out, they came up with this other lineup where it's like the Arcade Archives 2. And so what they're doing here is that they're porting over some games that are, they have like the more 3D elements to them. And so, like, for example, we had the Ridge Racer, and then also, I believe, this jet ski game. I forgot what it's called. But so that's been interesting, right? But then they also came out here with an announcement that they're doing this Rave Racer port, which that part is cool, right? And that's not the weird part about this announcement. But Rave Race is pretty cool. I don't know too much about this game other than I just remember that it was a sequel, right? To like it's like it's in the lines of like a Rave Racer game. Is my understanding of it. But what was interesting, so we have that game, right, that's coming out, which is cool. But then they came out with like this consoles archive lineup. So it seems like kind of around the same lineup, right, of these arcade archives, but now for consoles. And the games that they announced on it are, let me see here. So there was Doraemon, which I believe it looks very much like some kind of a Nintendo game of some sort, possibly only in Japan. I'm not 100% sure. But then also they showed off Cool Borders from the PlayStation 1 and Ninja Gaiden 2 on the Nintendo. So an odd selection of games, right? And I guess I'm not sure what exactly they're doing with this. I mean, again, if it's like, I mean, I guess it's like, what the name says, right? They're just archiving some console games, maybe games that somewhere else didn't get in, weren't able to get the license for, but whoever's doing these ports are able to. And, so who knows, right? And all, but, it's cool though, right? Like I said, I'm all about anybody trying to bring out some games from the past, right? So, but just kind of an odd selection of them. Oh, and there was another one too. Also, it was a Sonic Wing Special, which is like a top-down shooter. I remember hearing about the game, but I don't know much about it though. But so kind of cool though. We got an announcement that is coming out on the Switch 2 for Tales of Arise, coming on May 22nd of 2026. And that's pretty cool. I've been interested in that game. I had it on the PlayStation 5, and so it looked pretty cool. But, with a lot of these RPGs, nowadays especially, I just prefer to play them portably. So if it's a pretty well done port, I might consider getting it on there. As what I did play on the PlayStation 5 version, I thought it looked really interesting. But then Resident Evil Requiem, so they showed a trailer of that, and I mean, that looks excellent. Just the game itself, right? It looks really excellent. I'm actually getting really hyped for this game now. So I was a little hesitant if I was going to get it right away, but after seeing this latest trailer, I'm like, yeah, I think I want to play this as soon as possible. And it looks pretty good. And it looks really good on the Switch too, from what I've seen and from what people have been talking about it. But this game I will get on the PlayStation 5 just because for a game like this, if it's like a brand new release, right, and all, then I'm typically going to get it on the PlayStation 5 or Xbox just because I want it in the highest graphics fidelity as possible. But yeah, for Switch 2 owners, though, it looks pretty impressive, though, still. And so they also made the announcement, too. So Resident Evil Requiem is coming out on February 27th. And also on the same day, Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8, the gold editions of those versions, are also coming out to the Switch, too, on the same day. So there's going to be a whole lot of cool Resident Evil goodness there to get into. And on the Switch also, for the Switch 2 on a Pro controller, they're coming out with a Resident Evil themed controller. I think it's set on the 27th or maybe the 26th of February. I don't quite recall. But it all looks good though. And then also they announced some amiibos. I think that's what it goes. Amiibos coming out. I believe it's set in the summer of 2026. And I think it had Grace and with the new character from Resident Evil 9, along with Leon Kennedy. So for people that are into that, there you go. And then to close it all out, Bethesda. God, Jesus Christ, why do I always have a hard time saying that? But anyways, that company there. But they made an announcement though of games coming out from them, and so starting off, they announced the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition coming to the Switch 2. And that one there, I mean, what I've played of Fallout 4, it seems pretty cool. But I kind of was hoping for Fallout 3 and New Vegas, which I know those are the older ones, but those are the ones that I'm more interested in. But that one's coming out. But I don't know. I've heard some stuff about the Fallout 4 Anniversary Edition that it was a bit broken, I believe, right? The ones that came out fairly recently on it. So I would say proceed with caution on that one. Um, but let's see. They also announced that was coming out on it for the Oblivion. The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered that came out recently. So that's coming out on the Switch too. And so that'll be interesting to see how the Switch 2 handles that. As you know, I think that the Switch 2, or really a lot of games or systems, have been struggling with the Unreal Engine 5 game. So we'll see how that one turns out. And let's see. So then they also announced Indiana Jones and the Great Circle also coming out on the Switch 2. So that's that's cool. I mean, that game, I really want to play that game. But I'll probably play that on the Xbox. But it looks like a lot of fun. I'm a huge fan of the Indiana Jones movies, and so but that's so cool though that it's coming out on the Switch too. Although I'm curious to see how that game's going to run also because I mean on the Xbox it looks really nice, right? And they're able to push it at 60 frames per second on there. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that on the Switch too though, but I guess we'll see. But yeah, I mean that's all cool, right? That's all coming out on there. And so a lot of these games, so let's see, so Fallout 4, they announced is coming out on February 24th of 2026, so here fairly soon. And then Indiana Jones is coming out on May 12th of 2026, so here soon also. And for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered, they just said it was going to be available in 2026. It didn't actually give a more specific time frame. But yeah, those games are coming out for the Switch too, so overall, and there was a lot of other stuff too. Also, like I said, there was a lot of anime games that I'm not too familiar with. I love like anime, but I haven't really kept up with it too much. And when it comes to anime style games, there's not a whole lot that interests me on there. But if you are into it, there was some announcements there that people seem to be excited about. There's like this Grand Phantasm Blue or something like that. I think that people seem to like, and there was like a soccer game too also. And so, if you're into that stuff, there's some, looks like there was some pretty cool stuff there also that you might be interested in. And what else was on there? I can't really think of anything else. Those are the main things that stood out. I would definitely say, like, if you're wanting to know more, there's a lot of recaps out there that probably caught a little bit more than I could on it, right? But those are just some of the standouts I feel that were announced during the show. And at the very least, right, it all gives us a little bit of a picture of what to expect on the Switch 2. And I think there was just a lot of hype for a lot of different things that were going to come out on it. I think like, we were hoping for, we're going to get like a Chrono Trigger, remake or something like that. But, I think a lot of times with these directs, even whether if it's first party or a partner direct, is, you have to keep your expectations in check. And so not the best direct, but at the same time, there's still a lot of cool stuff that are coming out, even if a lot of it is sort of like ports from older games. But that's kind of why a lot of us got the Switch too, I feel, is to be able to play those games, but on the go now. Having Resident Evil, pretty much most of the library of Resident Evil games on the go now. I mean, that's going to be pretty cool because I feel like Resident Evil 2 and 3 are just right around the corner to be announced too. The remakes of them. And, the Bethesda games too, that's cool as well. And, obviously Rebirth. So, not a horrible show, but could have been better, but still some pretty cool stuff. All right, and so now we're going to get into some more modern gaming news and tidbits that have come out this past week or so. Some of this stuff might be a little outdated, or it's an ongoing story. So I just kind of will touch base on some of it as much as I can here. But we did get some new releases for the Nintendo Switch Online, and so it looks like this is for the Game Boy. And we got the Yoshi, which I didn't know. I guess I didn't know about this Yoshi game on the Game Boy, and also Balloon Kid. So, the Game Boy is another blind spot that I have. I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with the library, and this is of the original Game Boy. And so I plan to do like a little bit of a video on it, and mainly just I'm going to do a little bit of research on like what are the top 10 more popular games on this system, and then try them out, and so at least I have a good feel of what these games are all about. I didn't have a Game Boy when I was growing up. I kind of wanted one, but I wanted more the Game Gear. As you know, I was a Sega kid back in the day, but just something, my parents were going to buy me that. But yeah, so I'm trying to play catch up on a lot of like games that came out on the handheld because there's a lot of fun stuff on there. Let's see. And so this next one here, this story seems to be all over the place, and so I'm just going to touch base on some information that has come out on this regarding the Switch 2, and I guess you can decipher for yourself, or obviously if you're looking on to do more research on this, as I'm sure that the truth is somewhere in the middle, like always, because they're kind of like almost opposing sides to this. But it's like also the saying goes, right? Two truths can be true at the same time. But so what I've been reading is or more like watching videos on, is so the Nintendo Switch 2, it came out. So they came out with a sales report of some sort, and so indicated that. Well, I don't know if they themselves said it, right, but it basically was just people that follow this stuff have stated that the Nintendo Switch 2 has been the fastest selling console in history. From data that has come out, at least in the time frame that it's been out, right? Since it came out in June of earlier last year, and then also up until I guess the end of 2025 is my guess. I'm not sure. Uh, but the PlayStation 5 outsold the Nintendo Switch 2, I think by like about 1 million or so over the holiday season. So there's that there, right? But the Nintendo Switch 2, so it sold at 17.37 million is my understanding of how much it sold during, again, from June of last year till now. And some of its games have sold pretty well. Like, for example, Mario Kart World sold at 14.03 million, and Pokemon Legends at 12.3 million. And so, I mean, those kind of expected, right? And all those are some pretty sought after franchises, right, on Nintendo systems. There was a concern about Metroid and its sales, and so at first it was people were a bit concerned, right, as Metroid Prime 4 wasn't on this sales report, as it looks like the only report on sales for anything that hit at least $1 million, or at least 1 million units, I guess, sold. And so Metroid Prime wasn't on there, but then somebody reached out to them, and Nintendo rep reached out to someone, I didn't catch who, but that it did actually sell 1 million copies by the end of 2025. It's just that's if you combine the sales of the Switch and the Switch 2. Because they did a weird thing. I think what they announced, I could have some of my facts wrong here, but on just a quick video that I saw on this, I think it said something that if it's like a crossover title, like on the Switch 1 and 2, they're typically going to count it as a Switch 1 sale, I believe. If it's a Switch 2 version on it, but it's sold digitally, it still gets counted as a Switch 1 sale, I guess. But like if there were crossover titles, but if it's a physical version of a game that was on the Switch 2 also, then it would count as a Switch 2 sale. Something like that. It's kind of all weird, convoluted and all. But yeah, so supposedly Metroid Prime 4 seemed like it cracked at least $1 million if you're counting the sales of both consoles there. But the Switch also, and again, this is something that I would need to confirm a little bit further, but I did see something, though, that the Switch had beaten the Nintendo DS in terms of sales overall console sales. So if that's the case, and that officially makes the Nintendo Switch the second best-selling system, right behind the PlayStation 2. That's pretty cool, I guess. For I don't know. Are we thinking that the Switch will beat the PlayStation 2? I mean, we'll see. I don't know how much more games are going to come out on the Switch 2 to try to come up with that extra 5 million, that, or what was it, 5 million, right? That, yeah, I think that Sony came out with, well, because they were at 155 million, then they bumped it up to 160. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But we probably wouldn't know for like the next year or two or so if it ended up actually beating that. Let's see. But the opposing side to all this, though, is that, so it looks like I guess Nintendo also came out saying, somebody from Nintendo or so came out saying something along the lines of that they admitted that the system is selling less, because I guess in Japan it's killing it, right, which is expected, but that it's selling less than anticipated outside of Japan. And that apparently its stock had, or Nintendo stock had dropped some. Again, I don't know the whole extent of all this. And actually, I know I've been touching base on this here right before, and I think in previous episodes. So yeah, I mean, it's I think it's. I mean, the truth is probably somewhere in between, right? I mean, it definitely sold a lot of units, but maybe I guess depending on how much we're forecasting, what the profit margin is, and all that fun economic stuff, right? Where maybe Nintendo could still be actually struggling, though. I mean, like I said, I don't know for sure. I haven't done too much of a deep dive on a lot of those stories that are coming out, but it seems like they've sold a lot of units, but they could be struggling though. And this year, though, I mean, I feel like this year will be a very telling year for the Switch too. We got some cool third-party support stuff coming out for it, right? I mean, I know a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes with the Nintendo Direct that we had earlier, but you know, games like the Bethesda games, Bethesda, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, and like the Resident Evil games, and all they're gonna push some units, and because it really is convenient, right, to have a system that you can take portably. I mean, that's definitely convenient, and so I think when those games come out and all, I think they'll get people to buy the Switch too. Elden Ring also could be another one that could move some units as well. But I think that'll help. But I think the main thing that can really determine if the Switch 2 is going to be a success is if they have to announce something big from Nintendo themselves, though, because while it is cool, right, that you can play some of these third party games portably, but some of these games are older, right? Again, they have an audience at that, but they are older though, and so and technically you can buy them elsewhere, right? And and some of the like Microsoft and PlayStation, they do have some form of hybrid features to that also, as far as playing portably, not as like easy to do as a Nintendo system, but it is an option. And so I think what's really going to make or break Nintendo for this generation is they got to announce something like from one of their main big line games, right? Mainly from Zelda and Mario. And I feel that they have to get out there and say something on these, as because I think like if you can make some kind of an announcement on like a next mainline 3D Mario game, or kind of give an indication of either what the new Zelda game is going to be or some kind of a big remake of some sort, I think excuse me, that'll help a lot too as well. And but I mean, I would assume we're going to get some kind of information on the next 3D Mario. I think it's been enough time that there should be something that's been being cooked on, right, so to speak. And I mean, gotta have a Mario game, right? I mean we had the Mario Galaxy remasters that came out recently, which are cool, but what's the next big thing for a Mario game on this next generation system, right? I think that's what people really want to know. And so whether we get it this year or not, I don't know if we would get a Mario game this year, but there's got to be some kind of an announcement towards it, I would think. But I think that's going to be a big determining factor on ultimately, like I said, right, and how the system's going to end up doing. And then obviously that those games are really well done too, which, you know, that I would have some confidence in, right? I mean, Nintendo doesn't usually screw up their mainline games, but things things have been weird though in the video game industry. But another thing too, also that was announced is that, well, at least a rumor of some sort, but sounds like there's some truth to it, and that's that YouTube is finally going to be getting an app on the Nintendo Switch too. So they've been mentioning it already, right? That YouTube officially has come out saying, I think sometime last year, that it's in the works, and so I think there was some kind of a leak that came out that it's supposed to come out sometime this month, is from what I understand. And so, cool, right? It's YouTube is about the only thing I watch now, so I guess the more places I can watch it, the better. Um, I mean, it's not the end of the world if it's not on the Switch too, but I guess the only thing I could hope for this is that, yeah, I don't know, that it would have some kind of a cool feature, like I don't know, I mean, this might be kind of difficult to implement, but I'm thinking like, is there a way you can like if, at least portably, where you're playing something portably, and then maybe like a small little window, right, where it's running, YouTube or so you can, play a game and watch a video or something to that extent, right? That'd be kind of cool, I guess. But I don't know how they would be implemented. But other than that, I mean, if it comes out, great. I mean, just another place to watch YouTube. But other than that, though, can kind of take it or leave it. But another leak that came out though too, and is that so the PlayStation Portable, I'm sorry, the PlayStation Portal. So this little handheld device has been met with a lot of criticism, but also has been gotten a lot of love too as well. And ultimately, I do appreciate the PlayStation Portal. When it works good, it works really good. And so again, in my situation and all, it does come in pretty clutch, right, to get some gaming in. Although my daughter, for a while there, she was using my PlayStation Portal quite a bit, but I ended up just giving her my Retroid Pocket 3, where she can still play like Astrobot that she loves playing, but just play remotely. If she's, if we're trying to watch something on TV. But anyways, I personally do have a use set for it, and but it is highly dependent on the internet, obviously, and so if I can see how for some people it doesn't work, but apparently it's been selling well enough though. And so apparently so much so that there's some kind of so the leak is basically that there's going to be an OLED version of the PlayStation Portal to come out at some point soon. I mean, if it does, cool, right? But not something that I would personally want to get. I think the screen looks fine enough on the like the original one, and again, if it's just doing streaming, right, and all, I just don't see really the need for that, especially with. I mean, I would think that with the next generation of PlayStation, whenever that might be, even if it ends up being like 3, 4 years from now, if they do come up with some kind of a portable device at that point, that's probably what I would be more interested in. But for me personally, I want to see the need to upgrade. But another story that was coming out is again around Grand Theft Auto 6. And, I mean, there's probably going to be stories coming out about this game up until its release, and then definitely after its release. But so I think I talked about it last episode where there was a speculation that supposedly the game was going to come out first digitally and then sometime later physically. Well, it seems like I like I said, I just saw a few headlines on this, so I'm not 100% sure on how this got stated, but I believe maybe there might have been a rep from Rockstar that came out stating basically that um, sorry, I was driving here and somebody just made a crazy move right now, but yeah, that it was supposedly going to come out. Actually, like the physical release, it wasn't going to be delayed or something, or that Rockstar or the Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't getting delayed. And I believe I could be wrong on this, but also that the physical version is going to come out at the same time. Again, it's kind of one of those things like we'll wait and see, but yeah, that's supposedly the story, right? That it's not getting delayed, and so I guess cool, right, for anyone that's been anticipating this game. And I am. I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'm kind of curious to see if I don't know if they'd be able to bump up those graphics at 60 frames per second, even like on the PlayStation 5 Pro, because the game just looks hella detailed. And but we'll see. I mean, that's the main reason I'm actually really wanting to check this game out is just because I just want to see like I mean, this is going to be pretty much the pinnacle as far as like what can be done in a video game. And so I'd be definitely curious to see just what it looks like, right? What it plays like and all. And I mean, I'm sure the game is going to be pretty good as well too. Also, I mean, I've always enjoyed the Grand Theft Auto games, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be pretty stunning. I feel right when this game gets released. Um, but yeah, that's the story at least as of right now on it. It's still scheduled to come out on what is it, November 19th, I believe, right? This year. But we'll see how that all pans out. But another big story that came out too also is that so AMD, so they make I could get this wrong, but they make some kind of computer chips or CPUs, GPUs, something like that. But they might have leaked though on that when the next Xbox could be coming out. At the very least, the year. And so, there's been a lot of information coming out, right? That if the next PlayStation and Xbox are coming out, further out, like maybe 2029 or 2030 or so. But there was some kind of I mean, it was, from what I understand, it was a, this individual, I think they said her name was Sue. I think she was a rep from AMD, but it was a script that she had was given to read off of, right? So it sounds like there might have been like it was maybe intentional, but she read off though, basically stating that the Steam machine, right, that it was that's still expected to come out here soon. Which also touching quick base on that, Steam also came out saying something that they do want to release that system out soon, but because of the chip shortages and all that, and the RAM shortages and all that stuff going on, that it was also delayed. So a little mixed messaging on what they said, but they still haven't given a definitive leak date on that. But they mentioned that, but then they also said something along the lines of like that the next Xbox system is still set to come out for 2027. So it's like, oh, okay, so it is coming out next year then. And so yeah, like I said, as far as I know, they haven't denied the story or anything. So that's what we got on that there. And I mean, I don't know. It's wait. I mean, like I don't know what direction the video game industry is going nowadays. I mean, it all seems like, I mean, if we do get another powerful Xbox system, right? Because it almost seems like maybe they want to try to capture the same success that they had with the 360, where it came out before the PlayStation 3, right? And the Xbox for a good chunk of that generation, it was, on top of the PlayStation 3. So maybe they try to replicate that and get ahead of the PlayStation 6 whenever that might come out. I don't know. We'll see. And I just don't know if having a better system, a more powerful system, if that's really going to, I guess, be what Xbox needs right now. If they're still going to try to do this whole, have their console out there right along with, doing this whole pretty much becoming like a third party developer as well. So I don't know. It's all interesting, but that's just supposedly what had come out from a statement that this representative made. We shall see, I guess, what comes out of all that there. This next little segment that I'm going to do here is going to be a little bit, perhaps a bit uncomfortable to listen to outside of like the normal stuff that I normally do. I usually try to keep my content just lighthearted, focused on video games, and with, a swear word here or there. So, right. But not that, usually I try to keep it, let's say PG-13 like rated, as far as, just whether if it's my sense of humor and the content itself. And again, mainly sticking to video games along with just general life as a gamer, right, as you're older. Unfortunately, though, sometimes things happen in the real world, though, that cover so much or it influences so much, though, that even in video games, right, it kind of spills its way over onto it. And so there's a story here that's been kind of breaking out, specifically on the side of how it affects video games, that as unfortunate as it is, it's part of a bigger tragedy that's happened. And but it also at the same time, right, could have been something that was hugely influential on the direction that video games ended up taking in the more modern times. So this all has to do with the Epstein list and the Epstein Island and all. If you follow, I mean, it's kind of hard to get away from it nowadays, right? I mean, it's all over the place with everything that's being unraveled with the Epstein documents that have been coming out. And I mean, suffice to say, a lot of the stuff that's been on there is truly horrific and quite tragic on just everything that's come out. I mean, it's pretty horrific. And what's been coming out more and more now, it does go to say that a lot of the stuff right now that's coming out, and again, I'm just going to try to stick mainly to video games, but it's a lot of these are allegations, right? Or there are things that are in there, but nothing's been, actually tested in court yet or anything like that. I mean, it's hopefully there's some kind of justice that comes from all of this here, because again, it's truly horrific what's been coming out of all this. But when it comes to video games, though, I remember part of what I've been doing here and all is, and I even made I don't even know if I have it on my channel or not, but I recorded this thing where I was just talking about the golden years in gaming. And so I basically stated that it would have been from around 1991 up until 2013. The reason I chose those years is because from 1991, so that's when, I mean, gaming was, there was a lot of cool stuff beforehand, right? It's just that I feel like in 1991, that's when the console war really got going with Sega and Nintendo. And I think that rivalry there made it so that there was a lot of quality games coming out from not only one major company, but multiple ones, and just really good stuff and all. And then we got a lot of great games in the fourth generation, fifth, sixth, and then seventh. And in 2013, that's when the 8th generation systems kind of started coming out. Now, same thing as before 1991, as there were great games then, there was also a lot of great games that have come out since 2013. But if I'm looking at just the overall, not only the quality of the games that were coming out, but also just what gaming was as a whole, as far as where there was still a sense of like that games were being made by gamers for gamers. Where after that, it felt like everything just started getting more corporatized and all, and then things like microtransactions and loot boxes and live service games and all. Not that they don't have their place, but it just that seemed to be where a lot of companies' focuses were, and then what a lot of companies started chasing, and so because of that, I just felt that, I mean, and like I said, it's not like there wasn't any single player games and all. It's just it all started feeling, things just started feeling different. And I remember feeling that because when I got the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, there was a bit of a sense of like, I don't know if I'm liking where this is all going with all this. And eventually, and granted, that also was because that generation it took a couple of years, right, to really get going. Because then eventually we got some really great games on it, specifically more on the PlayStation 4, and then also on the Switch. But it's just like this feeling that I remember thinking back then that I was like, I don't know, things are just, they're feeling a little off. Well, if anything is to be believed on things that have come out, and I mean, these are emails that have come out, and from what it sounds like, they're legitimate. But so there's Bobby Kotick, or Kotick, I think is his name. So he was a CEO for Activision. I'm pretty sure he's retired. And some of my facts I might get a little wrong here. And this is just sort of like quick notes that I took as I was watching this video on this stuff. But so he was a CEO for Activision. And it sounds like he had a lot of allegations against him, right, for like sexual harassment and things along those lines there. So not a very good individual. But anyway, so he was behind Activision, and so meaning, behind like games like Call of Duty, for example. And so let's, using Call of Duty as an example, right? But this also kind of goes over to like other video game series as well too. So like Call of Duty, for I'm can't say I'm like the biggest first person shooter fan, but I do enjoy them though. And like the Call of Duty games from when they really started becoming popular. So like I'll even go back to like Call of Duty 2 on the Xbox 360. I really enjoyed the series. They were just really fun games to play through, and had a cool campaign. And I never really got involved in the whole online multiplayer aspect of it. But what I did play of the campaign, I thought they were fun, right? And I thought it was cool that they would have these online modes, so that way for people that like those games can play into them. But you bought your game, you had it, it was all on the disc, and eventually you would buy like some, I think like map packs for some of them, but for the most part though, you can get a pretty good experience just right out of the box, right? Well, that was mainly through like the 7th generation, right? Well, I feel like Call of Duty really excelled, at least for me personally. But then in 2013, like I said, right, things started changing up a bit. And so what ended up coming out in these emails is that, so supposedly there was some communication between this Bobby Kotick guy, Jeffrey Epstein, and then also some other guy named Pablos Holman, which I've been on the side, I've been following some political stuff and all, just because there's a lot going on, and I feel like it's good to be at least informed to some extent. But I'm still trying to, I guess, sort out this whole mess of who this Pablos Holman guy was also involved in this. But basically, there was communication between them, and they were going back and forth on these emails. But in these emails, though, so I'll read a quote here that supposedly came from one of these emails here. But basically, and what I didn't quite catch is like who this was going back and forth between, right? So, because I know there's a lot of like headlines that I started seeing, right, that like Epstein was behind the microtransactions. It doesn't seem like it was him directly, right? It's just that, but he was kind of involved in these conversations though with people that had the power to ultimately start implementing it in games more, like for example, like Bobby Kotick. But basically, it stands on here. So I'm all for indoctrinating kids in an economy. X Prize is a good idea, but the key is real world rewards. Okay, here we go. So Kotick said to Epstein in an email, learn to read, earn cell phone minutes, iPhone credits, virtual game, virtual items in games. So This email was sent on May 3rd of 2013, so just a few months before Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And so that game there, it was the first game in the series to feature microtransactions. And then eventually that continued in Call of Duty Ghosts as well, too, the game that came out after that. And so then it just and so then it seemed like after that, that's where there was just like this really big push, because I remember that where everything seemed like there was like these microtransactions that were really being forced and all. And granted, I wasn't really even playing a lot of these games, right? So, but it kind of seemed like it was spilling onto a lot of different things, like some series that I would really like for example, like Call of Duty, or like I would even say like Assassin's Creed. Now, Assassin's Creed, for the most part, you would still get the full game, right? But it's just like the advertising that you see like in the UIs, and I've talked about this at some point before. I know I have some time on my channel about like the UI of a lot of games afterwards just started seeming really busy. Like there were like so much content on there that it almost looked like a bunch of advertisements and trying to get you to buy a bunch of stuff. And it's like, I don't know. It threw me off. It completely threw me off, right? And I feel like the moment that kind of stuff started happening was because it just felt like it was sucking the soul out of like video games in general, as far as like the heart of it, where now we're getting really corporatized and all. But unfortunately, that was just, you know, where video games started heading, because there could be a lot of money could be made on that. But what it seems like is that because of, I mean, it sounds like because of the influence of some of these people in power is part of the reason why we have like things like microtransactions and all, right? I mean, there's probably a lot of different reasons for this, but a lot of it could be because of, well, basically because to try to get more money is the first thing. But the other part of it, though, and the more horrific part of it, is potentially just get a younger audience, kids, for example, indoctrinated into this economy here, and so that led to something else as well too. Now, this part I'm going to be a little hazy with was what I'm saying. Again, I was just kind of jotting some quick notes on this as I was watching this quick video in a hurry one time. But I mean, I hate saying this because usually I want to be a positive voice for like how video games can have a positive influence on people, and I still believe that that video games can have that in a lot of ways. But I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we thought that the opposite couldn't be true. And this has been the case since video games have been pretty much out. Like the whole Mortal Kombat scenario and Doom and all that. And there's been plenty of research, right, and all that. That video games themselves don't make people violent, right? That have debunked basically that a lot. That they don't make people violent. But there are other things, though, right? So, for example, addiction, right? That could be one thing, that's that can influence a lot of people. And with part of that addiction, and something really that you started seeing a lot in the early 2010s was like just this big rise. And I mean, there's always been like ever since pretty much the start of the internet, right? There's always been like forums and chat rooms and things like that. But it seems like they really started taking off a lot, though, even more from with around the early 2010s, and a lot of that seem to be spearheaded by like social media, right, like Facebook and things like that. Now, a lot of this, what I'm going to say right now, is just my own speculation, right? And I don't have like a inside source or a certain expertise in anything, right? This is just old man talking, right? But just from what I've seen, but I do have that, right? I've seen different generations grow up now and all, and this is something that I saw a lot with this generation, right? That were young during the 2010s, right? When after we had like the rise of like social media and things like that, and so see, because when social media started becoming a thing, I was already an adult. And so and even then, I did go through a phase where I was addicted to social media and all, and I'll give a little story on that here in a bit. But basically, with the rise of like online gaming, you started getting a lot of different groups popping up, right? And not just online gaming, but just that's one example. But you started getting a lot of groups pop up in a lot of forums and all. And so, for example, one that I kept kept seeing pop up was something like 4chan. I've never been on anything like that, so I don't quite understand it. But also think like Reddit and things like that. A little bit that I've gone on some of those forums and all. I mean, it is just there is so much, and I guess you can say this pretty much on anything online nowadays. But it started seeming though that in a lot of these spaces here, and then eventually it spilled over to like the more mainstream online medias, the negative commentary on there is just really, really poisonous. I mean, there is so much stuff on there, just like for every little thing that is just very hateful and trying to outwit someone, and just it just really like the sense of trying to be edgy and all. And it just basically has a lot of like spite behind it. Well, again, like places like 4chan and and Reddit and things like that, right? And all seems for a lot of like, these you see a lot of even the more worse stuff out there. But again, you can see that pretty much anywhere. So I say that because for people that started playing like games online, really getting hooked on these games, really kind of getting sucked into these, buying into like a game, right? Like eventually we would see like with stuff like Fortnite and all. Well, that leads to other groups, right? And so people started finding places where they can express themselves. And unfortunately, these expressing themselves that they were doing were very hateful. And I don't know the full extent of it. I just know that people like Stephen Bannon were involved. Now, he's a very far right extremist on it. And so a lot of these groups here started, I mean, it seems like they had some kind of an influence, right, to pave the way for a lot of like hate speech to come out, where it became very normal, even more and more normalized, right, to speak to, just basically just to be very spiteful and very hateful and all. And so again, all of these groups and everything were influenced or made by people within the Epstein circle. And so many things, right, outside of the more mainstream things, right, that that some of these people have been accused of, right, it almost seems like it's a lot of that stuff just ended up spilling to so many things, of the things that we deal now with in life, right, that for most sane people would consider to be very negative and toxic. So for example, just a lot of like hateful speech, hateful where empathy is like some seen as a weakness and things like that. And I say that because I've noticed that a lot, with a lot of the youth coming up, right? So that they, because they were raised in this environment here, almost like being targeted, that these potential platforms, right, were made to influence a group of people, and that influence can be strong too. So just to give a little bit of a story. So yeah, it would have been around in 2013 and a little bit before that. So I moved over to an area where I'm at now, and I was new to the area, so I didn't really know anybody. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I had a hard time just trying to make friends and whatnot. So there was a period of time though where I did get a little bit addicted to Facebook, and it's just because I was trying to seek out friendships and such. And then in that midst there too, I remember searching for like other kinds of social medias, and so I came across one. It was called Photocracy, and that was because at the time I was really getting into working out, and also it has sort of like almost like a video game element to it, where the more you work out, then you get points for it, almost like experience points. So it was a really fun app, right? I really enjoyed it, but it also had like a social media presence, right, and all where you can post things, and communicate with other people. Well, for about a year and a half or so, no, maybe about a year or so, like it was, I don't know, roughly around 2013 or so, in 2014, right at the midst of like when I had a little bit of an addiction to social media, I really got into this website, and I ended up finding a lot of like-minded people there. And so I ended up getting really addicted to it, where I mainly most of my socializing that I would want to do was on this website. And a lot of it just had to do, because again, it was just a lot of like-minded people that really were into workouts, and people that were into also like video games too. And so I had a group of like my online friends that we had a lot of great conversations, and uh, and it just made me feel like I belonged to like a community. Now, that's I say this is not that it was a bad thing, right? Because finding your group and all, or your people, so to speak, right? It's definitely not a bad thing. I mean, a lot of us, I think, are searching sometimes for our social circles, and so this experience that I'm talking about here was actually a positive experience because I got really influenced by a lot of the people that I was talking to and all, to the point where, I mean, I really made fitness and working out and such, right, a part of my life for a good few years. Not a bad thing for sure, right? Because again, if anything, I got into really great shape and really looked at things differently as far as the importance of working out, the importance of food, and eating healthy and things like that. Kind of falling off the bandwagon on that a bit and all, but that's a whole other story of my life. But anyways, during that stretch there, though, right, I felt like I had a community around me. So I can see the power of like websites like that or forums like that on how it can influence a lot of people, especially if you're on the younger side. And now, again, that was all for the positive influence on it. But now you take that, though, but then put a very negative spin on it. And I think that it's just so much of why there's just so much negativity out there because of so much communication and out there and all is happening through a lot of online forums and websites and social medias and all, and we're losing some of that human connection, right? Of being able to communicate with someone, even if it's someone you disagree with, because when you're talking to someone in real life, you're going to tend to want to be a bit more respectful and all, and perhaps a bit more understanding to someone else that maybe has different points of views, as opposed to behind a monitor, right? And all, and you're just typing whatever you want because there's no real repercussion, right? And all, if you just want to be as mean as you want to be. And I say that all to say, right enough, because I think that during this stretch here, with he started getting like these microtransactions in video games and live service games, and then all these online forums and all this started coming out, places like 4chan and whatnot, and then again started spilling into the social medias and all, like Facebook. I remember to one extent, it was really just your buddies on there. Now there's so many advertisements and everything, and pretty much anything that you click on is just so full of hate that it's almost like suffocating, and so I've pretty much have like steered away from like really wanting to be on any kind of social media. But I think about like for people that are younger or that grew up on that. I was having a conversation with someone fairly recently, and a bit on the younger side, and so I was talking about how that would get online, right? Start playing with his buddies and all, and eventually would get on these forums and start listening to a lot of someone talk about things, that was really, and a lot of it is politicized, right? And so how that really ended up radicalizing this individual to a certain point of view politically. And so that's where I just started thinking. I was like, I mean, that's what they're growing up with and all, as opposed to like talking to real people in the real world and all. It's more like just, these online forums and everything where, it can be highly influential, and it just basically indoctrinates and radicalizes a lot of the youth. And I know that they kind of seem like two different things, right? Like we're talking about microtransactions and video games and radicalizing, a group of people. But in a way, I think it all kind of comes together in a weird sense. And some of these emails that were coming out between these individuals, like, again, like Epstein and Bobby Kotick and this Pablo's guy and all, and Steve Bannon apparently too. I mean, it all kind of starts making sense now to the environment that we're in now, where it's just, like, again, going just, back to video games. A lot of these games just feel like very corporatized and all because they're meant to try to just take your money, indoctrinate you into their economy and all, into their ecosystem, I guess you can say. And then once they have you, there's so many different things that they can push on you to ultimately push on whatever agenda that they want, right? Left side, right side, I mean, everyone's guilty of that, to some extent, right? As far as like the different political spectrum and all that. And I feel like a lot of it is just has really influenced the minds of a lot of younger people, which is unfortunate, I believe, right enough, because so many people are getting advice or how they should believe and everything from people that they probably don't even know in real life, right? It's just things that they're seeing online or influencers and whatnot. And at least that's kind of what I've been seeing a lot, right? And all as as I'm 46 now, and so as I compare it to like things that my generation grew up with, or and I don't know, but still being young enough so I can understand, what a lot of the younger generation is growing up with now, and also being involved in the video game space myself, where I don't do like online gaming, but I understand it. I understand gamers and things like that, and it's just crazy on how widespread all of this has been with the Epstein stuff, that it even ended up spilling over to video games like this. And it's pretty horrific in a lot of ways, right? And again, that's just one little small corner, let alone everything else that has come out, which is, I'm not even going to touch on that just because it's not my, I guess, my platform to really speak on that kind of stuff, just because I'm not like I'm not like a political commentator or have a lot of knowledge on a lot of stuff when it comes to that things, but just suffice to say, right, and all that it's, really disgusting on a lot of the stuff that has come out, and how it even spilled over to everything, right, on as far as like how we know video games and such. But yeah, thought I'd share a bit of that. So again, it's I know a lot of times people don't want to talk about this sort of things and all, but it is, I feel, something that if we're looking at just the scope of the video game history and of a lot of these things ended up coming true, it's huge, right? Because it influenced how video games started becoming and what we see now. And I mean, I think there's been a bit of a pushback against that with, like, for example, last year, right? We saw a lot of great independent games like, Hollow Knight Silk Song and, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33 leading the way, right? All excellent games, and we're still seeing some of that. But there's no denying, though, that there was a big impact on that gaming had with live service games and microtransactions and all, on how it changed not only the way people play games, but how people get absorbed into this economy and all. And then also how games are structured around that, right? And definitely, like I said, right after, I remember after 2013, I've still been involved in video games and such, but I would say that if I could only have video games from certain eras, I would say give me the video games from the very start of time up until at the end of 2013, because we got The Last of Us at the end of 2013 and Grand Theft Auto 5, so I still want those games. Anything past that, well, there's a lot of excellent games that came out, Breath of the Wild, The Witcher 3, and Red Dead Redemption 2, and so forth, right? But as far as like the video game practices and everything, you know what? Take me back to the past is sort of my motto on that. But anyway, just thought I'd share some information on that because it's, like I said, right, in many ways, right, it did affect video games, and so I feel that it was worth mentioning because it'll be interesting to see how this all shapes out, if how much of this was true, and what ends up becoming of it now that we know this information, right? All right. But now let's start getting into the year of 2006. So we're going back in time now. If the audio quality again here sounds a little bit different, it's I'm on a different microphone here, so hopefully it's not too distracting. But back to 2006. Oh geez, what was I doing in 2006? I was working for a rent-to-own company. Those were some fun times. And other than that, just pretty much just working and acting the fool back in the day. I never did go to college or anything, so I was just trying to work my way up. Actually, I was trying to work my way up at that company. I think I was trying to become like regional manager or something like that, if I recall. But those were fun days. Let's see. But going back to 2006, though, so this was a pivotal year. As I was going through the list here of stuff that came out, it was a good year. I mean, there's always going to be good stuff that comes out in a year. It's just that it's not one of the more memorable years for me personally when it comes to like, overall releases that came out and then games that really left a lasting impact. I mean, there's definitely some, just not as many as I would, from some other years. But a lot of it had to do is that we were, you know, in the very twilight years of the sixth generation. And when I say that, mainly the PlayStation 2. And the seventh generation is, it's starting to get going, right? So usually the first year or so, it's a bit, there's some good stuff. It's just that it's a bit slow. But we did, like I said, have 2 new console releases this year as well, too. So starting to set the foundation of what would become the seventh generation, to get going in full gear. Let's go over here with some facts and statistics on what happened in 2006. So 2006 saw the release of many sequels and prequels in video games, prominently including Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, Madden NFL 2007, NBA Live '07, NBA 2K7, WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2007, Tony Hawk's Project 8, New Super Mario Bros., Sonic the Hedgehog, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, along with many prominent new releases, including Bully, Company of Heroes, Dead Rising, Gears of War, Just Cause, Lost Planet, Extreme Condition, Okami, Prey, Resistance Fall of Man, Saints Row, and Thriveville. 2 new home consoles were released during the year, Nintendo's Wii and Sony's PlayStation 3. The year's best-selling game console was the Nintendo DS, while the year's best-selling video game was New Super Mario Bros. For the DS. The year's most critically acclaimed title was The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for the GameCube and the Wii. And let's see. So some hardware releases. So going down the list here, it looks like there's a few things that came out. So in February 2nd, the Xbox 360 looks like it came out in other regions. It says here CEO in Mexico, I believe. But March 2nd, the Nintendo DS Lite. So that was like a revised model of the DS, and that's the one that I ended up. No, I did get the original one, and then I ended up getting this one, which is the one that I currently have now, also. And then on March 23rd, the Xbox 360 came out in Australia. June 1st, the Nintendo DS Lite came out in Australia, and June 11th it came out in North America, and then June 23rd it came out in Europe. November 11th, the PlayStation 3 came out in Japan, and then November 17th, the PlayStation 3 came out in North America. On November 19th, the Wii came out in North America, and then came out in Japan in December 2nd, and then in Australia on December 7th, and then in Europe, December 8th. Well, that's interesting. Is that for real? I guess the Wii came out first in North America, and then in Japan a few weeks later. So things were shifting in this generation, right? It was mainly this generation where it started, because let's see, last generation, so the Dreamcast came out in 1998, and then in 1999 in North America, and then the GameCube came out, I think, in September of 2001, and then a few months later in here in North America. And then the PlayStation came out in 2000 and 2001. Okay, so if it was a system that originally came out in Japan, which most of the times that's the case, they, for the longest time, right, they would come out almost a year earlier, and then they would come out here eventually in the United States. This time it shifted, though, because according to this, and I do vaguely remember this from back in the day, that the PlayStation 3 did come out first in Japan, but only 6 days earlier than in North America. And then supposedly, I don't know if that's correct, but well, I guess, it's on Wikipedia, I guess, but, which is, I know, not always accurate. But according to this, though, the Wii came out first in North America and then in Japan. But even then, it was only a matter of a few weeks, right? So things were shifting. I think a lot of it had to do with the American market just becoming so big for video games that I'm sure that companies just wanted to make sure that they got a head start here as well, too, as, for better or worse, right? United States has always been the biggest market for, consumer products and things like that. But so it was kind of cool, I remember, because I was like, oh, now we don't have to wait a full year, right? Almost a full year, right, until the system comes out. So I did remember being pretty excited about that there. But we'll go more into the consoles here that release. Well, more specifically, the PlayStation 3 and the Wii here in a bit. But game of the year, pretty much across the board, from what I recall, it was either between The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion or Gears of War. I'll touch base more on those games later, but yeah, those two games were the ones that just seemed to be all over the place when it came to game of the year. Let's see. But the most critically acclaimed titles were The Legend of Zelda, both for the Twilight Princess, both for the GameCube and the Wii. Let's see. Okay, so I'm looking for the best-selling video games in the United States. Okay, so the best-selling video games in the United States. All right, so I think this is going off of units sold. This one, I don't know. This one seems a bit more condensed than the previous entries from previous years, but let's see. So starting at number one, so it says Madden NFL 2007 was 3,900,000. New Super Mario Brothers was for the DS was number two at 2 million. Number three was Gears of War for the Xbox 360 with 1,800,000. Number four was Kingdom Hearts 2 with 1,700,000 and that's for the PS2. Final Fantasy 12 at number 5 with 1,500,000. Number 6, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess for the Wii and GameCube, also with 1,500,000. Guitar Hero 2 on the PlayStation 2 for 1,300,000. Number 8, Brain Age Train Your Brain in Minutes a Day on the DS for 1,100,000. And then also Call of Duty 3 for the same amount of units sold. And then Tom Clancy's Advanced Warfighter for the 360 for 1 million. And then also tied with number 10 NCAA Football 07 for the PlayStation 2 with 1 million. Interesting. We had some movies that came out this year, or some kind of like television shows or something for movies. But we had like Grandma's Boy. I never did see that one, but that one looks a little silly. I kind of want to watch it. Silent Hill, which was it was all right. Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea, which I'm assuming some kind of animation. Viva Pinata, I guess that's some kind of animation. I'm assuming also. DOA, Dead or Alive. I do remember vaguely seeing that there was a movie about that. Dance Revolution. Apparently, that was some kind of a show that came out. Mega Man Star Force. Let's see. I'm going to assume that was a show, like a cartoon that came out maybe in Japan. And then Joban Dobatsu no Mori. Looks like that's based off of Animal Crossing. And looks like that also came out. I'm assuming that's going to be some kind of animation also in Japan, but not sure. It doesn't really state here. But events that happened this year. So on January 26th, we had a few things that happened that day. And so let's see. So Nintendo announces its newly redesigned handheld, the Nintendo DS Lite. The new model is lighter, smaller, and configurable brightness, and has features and features an improved user interface. Also, Konami Corp announces the list of titles it expects to ship in 2006, ranging from Beatmania to Metal Gear Solid 3 Substance and covering multiple platforms. And then also public schools in West Virginia will add Dance Dance Revolution by Konami to their curriculum in an effort to combat obesity. Let's see, January 27th. So players of the Horde clan from World of Warcraft start the game against no cash charity to pay the subscription fees for valuable players strapped for cash. Well, that's cool. Microsoft of Japan made a statement to Japanese game magazine Famitsu regarding the Xbox 360 launch. It was a lot more difficult than we had imagined. We couldn't prepare the launch titles that we had promised, and it made an impact, said Microsoft of Japan Xbox Chief of Operations Yoshiro Maruyama. At the launch of the first Xbox in Japan, more units were sold in 3 days than have been sold for the 360 in 1 month. Ooh. Although the 360 did eventually do okay in Japan. I mean, all things considered, right? Because the Xbox just never really was able to break ground there in Japan that much. But eventually it did okay. All things considered, right, for an American company there. But the PlayStation Portable 2.01, 2.50 firmware versions previously were considered unhackable are hacked by Fujita. Thanks, Fujita. The Los Angeles Attorney's Office sues Rockstar Games and Take-Two Interactive over the whole hot coffee mod. That's what we talked about in the previous episode. Let's see. Let's see. And then on January 30th, so we had a few things going on here. Okay, so a mandatory update for Xbox Live on the Xbox 360 was released. Microsoft claims the update was for bug fixes and improvements. Members of the modding community claim that the true purpose of this update was to halt the progress of the modding community. So the modding community seems like they're going in full swing right on these systems here, and so then the game companies are trying to do what they can, right, to prevent that, but eventually they crack through. And then also Excuse me, God, I got some woke up with a bit of a congestion. But on January 30th, Nintendo's released a statement regarding the red tulip phenomenon on Animal Crossing Wild World, stating, "We have isolated the problem and detained that there was a temporary error with the upload tool when this letter was posted. Earlier, there had been speculation that the tulips were a result of black hat hackers. Hackers once again." Let's see. But then on January 31st, we had a few things too. So on this day here, so Sony is reportedly building an Xbox Live killer for the PlayStation 3. And then Star Force, a DRM maker for, computer games, threatens to sue popular weblog Boing Boing for criticizing its products. Boing Boing. That's funny. Blizzard Entertainment responds to the LGBT debate happening in World of Warcraft. The company stated to promote a positive game environment for everyone and help prevent such harassment from taking place as best we can. We prohibit mention of topics related to sensitive real-world subjects in open chat within the game, and we do our best to take action whenever we see such topics being broadcast. And then Sony announces the 10 servers will be merged with 10 others on EverQuest 2. Players are cautiously optimistic. Oh, yeah, a lot of open world, or like the, what do they call it, MMORPGs are really going into full swing. They'd already been out for a while, right? But they're just gaining more popularity. And so I'm sure that there's a lot of regulations and rules and things like that, right, that they need to monitor, just because, when humans all get together, humans be humans, for better or worse. February 6th, the Tiger Telematics bankruptcy, the Gizmondo handheld is discontinued, only selling nearly 25,000 units. I vaguely remember that Gizmondo thing. May 10th through the 12th, the 12th annual E3 is held in Los Angeles, California, United States. So E3 is still in full swing. This is its 12th one. June 21st, the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise celebrated its 15th anniversary. God, we've been at it. Yeah, because it's it would have been 1991. Yeah, God, jeez, I've been doing these episodes for a bit now too. Because I just remember talking about Sonic the Hedgehog. God, it didn't seem that long ago, but I guess it's already been a few weeks. 15 weeks now. November 7th, Left Behind Games releases Left Behind Eternal Force amid much controversy. Not sure what that is. November 17th, Sony releases the PlayStation 3 in North America. November 19th, Nintendo releases the Wii. And then December 13th, the 2006 Spike Video Game Awards are held. I was actually watching a video of that earlier, just to kind of get in preparation, right, for just getting me in the mindset of 2006. And I forgot about those awards. They were very loud, very, it almost had like this extreme sports sort of vibe about it. Samuel L. Jackson yelling "motherfucker" at the end, and it was fun. I think what was the game of the year? It was The Elder Scrolls Oblivion ended up taking game of the year. But it's on YouTube. They're fun to watch, just to kind of see how the Game Awards that we had back then, right, were done. For business related items, though, let's see how many. Okay, because I know last episode we had quite a bit. Okay, not too many this time, but we have a few. Okay, so on January 5th, Vivendi Universal Games acquires High Moon Studios, formerly Sammy Studios, which gained independence from Sammy in 2005. January 9th, Take-Two Interactive acquires Irrational Games. January 26th, Sony reports the strong sales of the PlayStation Portable helped the company to make profit of 70 billion yen for the first time in 11 years that the company has managed to avoid an annual loss. Oh. Microsoft announces 293 million losses in its home and entertainment division, record revenues overall. Nintendo reports declining GameCube and Game Boy Advance sales, but increases profits by 92.2 billion yen. So yeah, with the GameCube, and then the thing about with Nintendo back in those days was that they always had their handhelds to fall back on, because like the GameCube Advance, it did pretty well. It didn't do quite as good, if I recall right, as like, say, for example, the Game Boy, but it did good enough though and all, which was good, because the GameCube didn't, it wasn't like a complete flop, but it, didn't do, I'm sure, as much as they would have wanted to. But the Nintendo DS, though, right, and all that's what was also really picking up too. So the Nintendo DS returns. So this is on January 27th. So the Nintendo DS returns to the top of the weekly Japanese charts with 64,515 units sold compared to 38,271 for the PlayStation Portable. The PlayStation 2 is the third with its 26,135 units sold, while the Xbox 360 continues to sell poorly, just 3,616 less than the GameCube. Oh, no, wait. So just 3,616, which was less than the GameCube. Okay. The 5 best-selling games were Brain Age Training for Adults 2, Animal Crossing Wild World, Super Mario Strikers, Brain Age for Adults, and Mario Kart DS, all published by Nintendo. Microsoft lowers its estimate of Xbox 360 sales in the first 90 days from 2.75 to 3 million units to 2.5 million units due to supply shortage. The yearly estimate, 4.5 to 5.5 million, is unchanged since Microsoft plans to increase its console production with the help of a new manufacturer, Celestica. Meanwhile, Microsoft postpones the Australian 360 launch from March 2nd to March 23rd, 2006 due to a short-term manufacturing challenge. May 30th, so shares of Take-Two Interactive, the controversial creator of the Grand Theft Auto series, rose Monday after news that the company was in takeover talks with an unnamed buyer. January 31st, CNET reports that Cisco Systems might be interested in buying Nintendo. February 15th, Screw Attack, a video game-related website, is launched. I kind of remember that. February, Tiger Telematics, the manufacturer of the Gizmondo handheld console, files for bankruptcy. In May, IEMA successfully merged with VSDA, which is Video Software Dealers Association, to form combined organization EMA, or Entertainment Merchants Association. In July, ECA, or Entertainment Consumer Association, is formed. In July, Atari plans to sell off their game development studios. In October, ECA, so again, Entertainment Consumer Association, is soft launched. And just as unknown esports organization Optic Gaming is founded. Okay, so we had some stuff going on there, and so just some other stuff too also here that I'll touch base on a bit. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to hold that a little bit here while we start talking about the systems themselves for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. So let's just start talking about some of the games. So again, like always, right, I'm going to probably miss quite a bit of things, and a lot of where I'm going to start missing is on the portable gaming scene too, and along with PC. PC, again, I just wasn't into it back then. And then also with the handhelds, I had the handhelds. I had the DS, I had the Game Boy Advance, and I had the PlayStation Portable, but I didn't really use them too much. And though I got a few games for them, it's not something I got really involved in. So I'm probably going to miss a lot of games on those systems there. But I did jot down a few here that I had some familiarity with. But starting on that note, right, for the handhelds, so the DS, so these were two games that I remember I did buy for it back then. It was New Super Mario Brothers and Final Fantasy 3 as well too. And New Super Mario Brothers, basically, it's just another Mario game, right? Only now it's in 3D. It's like a 2.5D now. And so this kind of started the trend of this series of Mario games, right? That would be called the New Super Mario Brothers games. And I mean, it's cool. It's fun. This one's kind of hard to judge because I think about like the New Super Mario Brothers games, right? Because there were several of them that came out in the years ago, and I haven't really gotten too far in either one of them. And when I play them, I was like, they're fun, but then I eventually put them down, and it's not just something that really, I don't know, they just don't really hook me the way like other 2D Mario games have. So I don't know. I mean, and they're fine games. I think they're just kind of like they're good games. They have good level designs, colorful graphics, good solid play mechanics and all. There's just something about them that just feels a little bland almost. But either way, though, it was pretty cool seeing Mario in a 2.5D form now, and on the Nintendo DS there. And so for what it is, it was fun and definitely worth picking up, right, and all if you had the DS back in the day or even now to this day. But there was also Final Fantasy 3, which was the first time this game was released in North America. Only now it wasn't like the typical 2D RPG. Now it was done in a, with 3D graphics now. So they remodeled the whole game. They gave the main characters now, because before there was just like nameless characters. But now they actually have names and a little bit of a characterization to them. And I do recall playing this one, and I this was one of the few Final Fantasy mainline games that I haven't quite beaten it, but but I did get it on the DS, and I got quite a ways into it. I mean, I want to say that I was like towards the end, because I remember I got like, I think the final form of the airship and all, and then just at some point though, I think I want to say I got stuck somewhere, and then I just, like I said, all right, with handheld gaming back then, I was even surprised I got that far into that one, but it just wasn't really my thing, and I think I just kind of like, I just put it off, and but I do want to go back and beat it at some point. But it's cool for what it is. It's another way of playing Final Fantasy 3, which was, for me, I would say this was probably my least favorite in the series, even more than Final Fantasy 2 and 13. And even though Final Fantasy 2 and 13, I mean, they're not horrible games, but they're not the most memorable in the series. There's just not a whole lot though that I remember about Final Fantasy 3 though. And again, it's not a horrible game by no means. It's just, if I'm comparing it to the rest of the series, it's just kind of one of the more lackluster ones, but still worth playing though for sure. But then over on the PlayStation Portable, so we had Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories. And I never played these games, so the Liberty City Stories or this one back in the day, and but I have a curiosity to maybe try them at some point, but not something I'm rushing out to do. But it seems like it's more of Vice City, So if anything, this one kind of intrigues me a bit, just because I do love that Vice City setting with its '80s aesthetics and all that, and so maybe I'll give this one a go at some point. But for what it is, I mean, it was pretty cool how they were able to pretty much cram that all on the PSP, which the PSP is, give or take, right? Like the PlayStation 2 and obviously the previous Grand Theft Auto games came out on that. But it's still kind of impressive, right? At least at the time, right? That you were playing something like that in your handheld, right? It was pretty revolutionary back then. But the sixth generation still had quite a bit of stuff though that, I mean, it was, I would say, well, I can think of one more title that came out next year, but for the most part, though, I would say that this is probably like the last big year that the sixth generation had, and by that, what I mean is the PlayStation 2. Now, there were still games that were coming out for it. It's just a lot of more like sports games and such. So I'm talking about like original titles still, right? Meant for the sixth generation, because we had a few, and there's some pretty good stuff here actually. But starting with Guitar Heroes 2. So that just expanded more on the Guitar Heroes, right? They came out last year, and so this series was starting to become really popular. It was actually nominated for Game of the Year at that 2006 Spike TV Awards that I mentioned earlier. As I was watching the video, I was like, oh, it did actually get nominated. But it was just kind of more of the same, just, I think, like slightly improved mechanics. I think it had like a multiplayer on it now, if I recall. I don't quite know, but, and then new music and all. And it was just becoming a big hit, right? And so I think that the developers of this game, who was it? Harmonix, maybe? I don't know. But I'm sure that they saw like a little bit of a cash cow with this series here. Yeah, it just took off. But we also had Bully, and this is a game from Rockstar, which I'm not familiar with, but I know it's kind of a cult following, or it has a cult following to it. By understanding, you play this kid and you go into like this kind of like a preppy university of some sort, but then you get into some shenanigans apparently, right? But a lot of people that have played it, they seem to really like it, so I'd be curious to check it out at some point. But it came out on the PlayStation 2. Maybe, I don't know if it came out on the Xbox, but I know eventually got a port on the Xbox 360. Excuse me. And we also had Mortal Kombat Armageddon. So this is one that I didn't play. I played Deadly Alliance and Deception, but I didn't play this one. But my understanding on this one, though, is that it has a big roster of characters, and supposedly also it something about like the fatalities. I think that this was one of the knocks that they had against the game, that It's like you can sort of like create your own fatalities, but then they just kind of become like generic, like, ooh, you're chopping someone's arm off or something like that. It's like, it just felt like there wasn't like some creativity behind it. But I think I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure I heard something on that about this game. But it's kind of like at the same time, you have so many characters, right? And also, I'm sure it was probably been a bit difficult to program so many fatalities, right? But that's a little bit that I know about it. But otherwise, I haven't really heard about it. I just know that it ends in really grand fashion, and which is what eventually the series ended up getting another reboot, right? Because this one sort of had a finality to it, right? Um, but yeah, but other than that, I'd be curious to check it out at some point. I wish it would release like Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon in some kind of a collections package. I mean, we got the Mortal Kombat collection recently, right, with the older games, so maybe they'll do these, because I feel like these that were popular during when they were released, but then I don't hear much about them though. So, and then there's no other way to play them right now. I mean, like officially, anyways, as far as I know, maybe on one of the PC storefronts, but not sure. But another game that I thought was pretty cool though was this game called Black. And so this is a first-person shooter that came out on the PlayStation 2 and also on the Xbox. And I'm actually double checking right now because I want to say so it's a first person shooter, but it was developed by let's see if I'm right. Can I get the info here soon? Oh, that doesn't tell me. But so it was published by EA, but I want to say that I think the developers were what was their name? Criterion, I think. And so if I don't have the name right, but I'm pretty sure it's from the developers that did the Burnout series, right, which I've already raved about in previous episodes. And so I thought it was interesting that they were doing a first person shooter. And so the game actually looks pretty good. I played this one on the Xbox, and the graphics on it are pretty solid on it. And the sound effects are really good, and the action is pretty kick-ass too. Also, there's a lot of there's some indestructible environments, the gun effects and all. As you see the bullets fly out of your gun and all, it all sounds really cool, and it's a pretty cool first-person shooter. The story and all is a bit generic, but this one's really, you go for the gameplay on it, and yeah, it's not bad. It's a fun. I would say, as far as I know, I think it's one of the Xbox games, original Xbox games that you can still get through backwards compatible and even on digital, right? Because I know I have it. I'm looking at it right now on my Xbox Series S that I have it digitally on there. So yeah, I mean it's a cool game. I would definitely check it out if you're into like checking out some older first person shooter games, single player, because I don't think it has a multiplayer anymore on it. But then there was also Okami, and Okami is a gorgeous game. Its art style is very much of like those what do they call like watercolor paintings from Japan from back in the day, and it looks truly stunning. And it's just when you're looking at the game, it has a certain like almost like a peaceful flow to it. It runs pretty smooth, and really the artistic style to it is just, it's really mesmerizing almost. And you play this wolf. It's called like a wolf god named Amaterasu, I believe. And you have this little bug-like creature that kind of just yaps and yaps away, throughout the whole journey, which is a little bit of a complaint on the game. I mean, he's funny enough. It's just that sometimes it's like, okay, you're about as bad as, no, it's worse than Navi from Ocarina of Time. But speaking of Legend of Zelda, the game is very much, well, not very much, but it takes a lot of inspirations from like a Legend of Zelda formula, where you have like a hub world and then eventually go into these quote unquote dungeons, and has some really cool puzzles and power ups that you get, and how you use this celestial brush to attack your enemies. It's very original. I mean, one of the most original games on the 6th generation, even to this day. It's really stunning to look at. Cool music as well too. Again, the only main complaint that I have about this game is that the intro can take a little bit long to get going, because I think later versions fix this, but in the original I don't think you can skip it. And so I mean, it's got a cool little story intro. It's just that after so many times it's like, okay, you gotta let this play. And then the little bug character that joins you, right? He can be a little annoying, but other than that, this is a really impressive game. I really enjoyed Okami, and definitely one of my more favorite games of this year. So I would say that if you've never played this for some reason, because it was kind of like Beyond Good and Evil, where it was one of those games that were really underappreciated, but now it's been I've seen this game so many times on like underappreciated games lists now that I think it's gotten some popularity because of that. And it's had a lot of releases down the road, right, on different platforms. Because originally it came out on the PlayStation 2 exclusive, but then it came out on, you can buy it on many different ways nowadays. So definitely there's ways to play it out there. And I would say if you haven't played it for some reason, but if you want to try something, if you miss the old school, well, not super old school, but like the more old versions of like 3D Zelda games like Ocarina of Time or Wind Waker, if you miss that style, and if you've never played this Okami game, check it out, because I think it'll give you that Zelda game you might have been craving, with at the same time, you're getting this beautiful art style, cool game overall, and Amaterasu the Wolf, he's a really cool character to control. So yeah, highly recommend this game. But then we had some RPG or RPG-like games that came out on the PlayStation 2, which ended up being some of the more highly sought-after games on the system for RPGs, and they all came out within this year. So there was Grandia 3, and so 1 and 2 are really good. This one I do remember I bought, and I had played this game for a few hours. I want to say back in the day I played it for roughly about 5 or 6 hours or so. And what I can say on this one is that the combat system is still excellent. So that's one of the really great things that you're going to get with this Grandia series, is you're going to get a really cool battle system. The story, I remember I liked it. It didn't really quite hook me like 1 and 2 did, but I liked it. It was fine enough. The graphics are pretty good on it and all, but something about it, I remember, I just felt it felt like a little bit more generic or so. But it still seems like a really good RPG, but just one that I haven't really played all the way through. But yeah, came out this year though, and I would still recommend it if you're into RPGs from this generation. And again, you're going to get a really good combat system. So I highly praise the combat system on Grandia games. Grandia. We also had Xenosaga 3. And so this capped off the series here. So this series was originally going to be 6 parts, but that was a little too ambitious. So I talked about it before, where I played the first one. I really enjoyed it. I beat that game. I loved it. Part 2, I remember I bought, and I didn't beat that one. And so then part 3 here, I remember I bought it, and God, this is another game too that I had it at one point, and then I sold it, and then eventually this game would become pretty valuable, but whatever. But my understanding is that so there was going to be 6 parts, and 1 and 2 more or less seem to be parts 1 and 2 in this overall chapter, that 6-part chapter that they had planned. But then in part 3, they kind of condensed everything and crammed it all into one game, what was still remaining. And even so, people, from what I understand, from what I've read on this game and all, it seems like it's still a pretty beloved game. And for some people, I've heard that it's even their favorite Xenosaga game. And so, yeah, it was the last one that we got. Part 2 wasn't, it was sort of known as the black sheep of the series, but then between part 1 and 3, they seem to be the more favored ones. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely, it's a cool series to get into. Like I said, I could say that just even having only played really the first one, but I hope they re-release these games here. And I would say that if you like the storytelling of the Xenoblade Chronicle games that are out now, definitely these would be ones to seek out. I mean, but honestly, you probably have to go the emulation route and all, because you can't really play them anywhere else. And then I'm sure they're pretty expensive to try to get the physical copy. At least I know I've seen that Xenosaga 3 can be pretty expensive. But there's rumors and rumblings here, right, that something might come out of the Xenosaga here at some point soon. Specifically with, I think I talked about it some episodes back, where Nintendo bought Bandai Namco, at least a division of theirs. And so that they were so Bandai Namco had a hand in releasing these Xenosaga games in the past. So maybe, but we'll see. Kingdom Hearts 2 came out this year as well, and Kingdom Hearts 2, it's a fan favorite for a lot of people. So Kingdom Hearts, the first one, is still my favorite. I just felt that the overall story to that one is a bit more understandable and really leans into I just felt it had the best match of, well, I'll say this. The first Kingdom Hearts game, it's very much Square and Disney, but slightly more Disney, I feel. And I say that because of that, I feel like it makes the story more understandable, more not grounded, I guess, but just more understandable overall, right? Like when you watch a Disney cartoon, you know what's going on. It's there's no real complexity to it and all, and it's charming, it's fun, and you understand it, right? More or less Kingdom Hearts, right? I feel. I mean, it has some complexity to it and all, but for the most part, you're following along the whole way through. And I feel because it really emphasized on a lot of the Disney elements of it, I think that helped it. That's just my very humble opinion on it. Kingdom Hearts 2, on the other hand, it's still Disney and still Square, but definitely leans more to Square style of storytelling. And by Square, you can say Tetsuya Nomura. So Tetsuya Nomura, he eventually had this, he's been criticized a lot for having like this way of telling a story that is very vague, very like, dealing with fate and everything that goes super convoluted, right? And he would get a reputation for that, which I feel like started with this game here. Having said that, though, Kingdom Hearts 2, it plays better than the first one, and it looks incredible, too. You still go to a lot of cool Disney worlds, and there's still a lot of cool Disney lore to get involved in. But it definitely starts going, with what's going on the Kingdom Hearts side of the story. So the Square Enix part of the story, it gets really, really convoluted, and there's a lot of the way it tells the story is sort of like it gives you like a hint of something. You're like, oh, what is this? But then it doesn't really touch on that until much later, and even then, it's all very vague, right? So it kind of like leaves you like these little breadcrumbs of story plots, but you don't really quite know what's going on. Now, me personally, I honestly didn't mind it too much, but I can see how the story for this one can be kind of complicated for some people. Having said that, though, like I said, right, this still seems to be a fan favorite for a lot of people, but that's a common criticism, though, that I have heard of this one here. But if you're wanting to get into the Kingdom Hearts series, though, at the very least, play 1 and 2. They're really good though overall, right? And like I said, the gameplay was really improved on this one. It gives you a lot of cool new moves and all, and streamlines certain things that makes it a lot of fun. And yeah, just I mean, it's a blast to play through. You'll be surprised in some of the Disney worlds you're exploring this one. You're like, oh wow, I was like that. I was not expecting that. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, Kingdom Hearts 2, great game. And then we had Final Fantasy 12. And so Final Fantasy 12, so this was, well, obviously the 12th installment in the series. And, this game, it was delayed a bit because I remember I was really highly anticipating it. And this is kind of sort of what the fall of Final Fantasy for me came. And when I say fall, I don't hate like the new stuff that they're doing. Actually, some of it I actually quite enjoy, really enjoy. But it also is different though than from what was before it. And this is sort of like after playing this game is where I just got like the feeling that this is going to be the reality now of what this series was going to become. And so Final Fantasy 12 is by no means a bad game. It's actually a really great game. And it's one that I kind of want to go back to and play because I remember when I played it back then, I was enjoying it. I liked it. It took me a while to beat, but I beat it because this is a long game. It's like, I think I clocked in like almost 80 hours on this one. And that's because I wasn't really like trying to do side content and all. It's just the main line of the story of this game. It's just that long. And the whole time I'm playing it, though, I remember being a bit disappointed by it. And that lingered on through the whole time I played it because it took me like almost 2 years to beat this game. And a lot of it had to do with, first of all, it's just a long game. And there was just a bunch of other games, right, that I kept playing. And then also with the release of the new shiny 7th generation games, it kind of, there was a feeling, at least at the time, right, where I was like, this is like an older game now, from a previous generation. Nowadays, I don't have that so much anymore, but back then, I kind of did. So it took me a while to beat it. But also the reason why is that I remember every time I would play this game, I was a little let down because I'm like, this isn't like the Final Fantasy games from before. Something about it I was like, no, it just doesn't feel the same. But even though in hindsight, though, I actually really like it. And it's got, an interesting combat system with the Gambit system. Really, I mean, great graphics for the PlayStation 2. Yeah, incredible music actually too. Not by Nobuo Uematsu anymore, but I don't know who the composer is, but he does a really good job. And just overall a cool world to explore. Very much inspired by Star Wars in a lot of ways, but I think a lot of it just had to do with like the characters' designs just felt different. The gameplay felt different. The story, while it's very interesting, and I want to say I think it's from the same team that did like Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story.
if it's not, it had a very similar style. Was written in this very Shakespearean way, very dramatic, right? So it's, I mean, it has its somewhat silly moments, but specifically with Vaughn and Penelope, but it's very much more matured toned, I guess you can say. And but the problem though that I had was that the setup is great at first, but then somewhere in the middle or so, I remember the story doesn't really, like, I can't really remember too much of the events of what happens in it. And for me, that was kind of an issue, right? Because Final Fantasy games before that have always really stood out because they have this really incredible story, right? Along with their gameplay and all. And with this one, I just felt like the story didn't really come together as good as I would have hoped. Now, again, I want to play it again because with a new fresh pair of eyes, because back then, like I said, when I was playing through it, I was a bit disappointed. So I went in, I already had a bit of a chip on my shoulder for this game. And so I want to play it now that I have a new appreciation, right, of just not only games, but just things in general. And so see if I'll get a new, because I feel like I'm going to like this game more if I play it now than I did back then. And so now there's like a new way to, with the new improved way of playing that game too also. So I think it's like, it's right time for me to replay that game now. But regardless, though, it was still one of my more favorite games of this year, though, for sure. But let's hop over now to the 360, the Xbox 360. So we had some decent games that came out on this, and there was I would say three main standouts with some other decent games as well too. But just to touch base a little bit on the 360 here. So I read earlier, right, that they were ramping up production and they ended up getting a new company. I think they were called Celestica to help them with that. So it didn't mention it in the previous thing that I was reading about, just, general statistics and events that happened in 2006. But just watching videos on this before. So we all know about the Red Ring of Death, right? That happened with the Xbox 360. I think it's next year where that really became a big deal, but it was starting in this year. So from what I understand, there was reports that were coming out from people, right, saying like, hey, my Xbox is, it's so just for people that don't know, so in the original Xbox 360, so there's a power button on the front, right, that has like, like the power logo and a big old white button. Around the white button, though, there's like these 4 LED lights. And so the lights could represent like how many controllers you have connected to the system, right? So because you can connect up to 4. So like if you had one controller, one green light would appear, 2 for 2, and so forth. I think that's what they were for, I believe. But those lights also could indicate if something was wrong with your system. So like there's a bunch of different codes for it, I forgot, but like, 2 lights, it means like 2 flashing red lights could mean something's wrong with the system, right? And then it was a certain something was wrong with it and so forth, right? What was happening to a lot of people was that they were getting, so it was called the Red Ring of Death. And I'm not going to go too much into it in here because I'm pretty sure this will be touched on more in the next episode, because that's where it really blew up. But just basically, people were reporting this, right, that it was flashing these red rings around the power button, and so there was some reports about it that was coming out. At this point, though, or Microsoft was sort of trying to downplay it a bit, and so again, like we're gonna go more into the next episode and all, but just so you know, right, and all, there was a report coming out about this here at this time. Because that became a big old issue. but just wanted to mention that here, right? And all, because again, from a lot of like different documentaries and all that I've seen on this, the reports were starting to come out in this year here in 2006. But going over some of the games here that we had, so some of the games that I got into in this year, and just other games in general, but there was a Tomb Raider Legend. So this was a reboot of the Tomb Raider franchise, and this time it was handed over to Crystal Dynamics. And so they were known for like doing the Legacy of Kain games. So I remember when they announced that they were doing the new Tomb Raider game, I was pretty excited because I was like, oh yeah, Crystal Dynamics, they've been pretty good programmers. So this version here, it was also made for the 6th generation as well too, but then the 360 got its port. And I could be wrong on this, but I think, because I remember, like, again, I was kind of scratching my head as to like, well, the game looks nice. Like the texture looks nice. It looks next gen. but I want to say because I think I played the Xbox version too, and I think the Xbox ran at 60 frames, and this one only ran at 30. And so that's what I was thinking. I was like, what is it about? I just remember feeling that, like in the early seventh generation, like why do games that were ports of previous generations run at a slower frame rate? And I want to say I think it was like Burnout Revenge and Tomb Raider Legend that I remember thinking that about. I'd have to watch a comparison video to confirm, but I remember thinking that. But even then, though, like I said, the textures look really nice, though, and so give it a bit of a feeling of that it was like next gen, although it still felt sixth gen also. But the game itself is pretty good, though. I did enjoy this Tomb Raider Legend game. It felt a little bit more actiony than adventure-y, but was still pretty cool, though. And then there was Sonic the Hedgehog. So I remember I rented this game, and again, the information wasn't quite as widespread as it is now with video games, but there was still some information out there, right? Because we already had the internet, it was often going and all, and gaming websites and such. But I wasn't really paying attention to that stuff as much as I do now. And so I remember, so this was before it was one of the first games that I rented when it came out. So I rented it almost, I think, on day one because I was like, oh, cool, a Sonic game, right? Let's see what it's all about. And I remember playing it. I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, this is kind of broken. I remember going through one stage and then my Sonic kept going through the screen, like flying off the stage. And I was like, what is going on with this game? And so, like I said, I rented it. I put it off really quick. I was like, nah, I don't like this game. It wasn't only until much later, right, that I found out of just how, that was it would become a very infamous broken game, right? Like, it's a game that's known to be just, you know, uh, it, I mean, nowadays a lot of games come out broken, but they're able to get patched. This game was one that we came out broken and it was left broken. And so it's always been kind of infamous for that there. I remember like, it was kind of funny. I just rented it one day blind just because it was Sonic, right? I was like, again, I'm not the biggest Sonic fan, but I wanted to play a new Sonic game on, the next gen systems. And yeah, pretty quickly I was like, yeah, this is not a good game. But yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog. But another game that I thought was pretty cool, though, that I rented back in the day was Lost Planet Extreme Condition. And this game here, I remember I thought it was really cool because, again, now this is a game that I started, one of the first games that I played that I felt like, oh, okay, this really feels next gen because you're in this kind of snow ice world and there's like these huge like worms, like alien worm, the sand or ice worm things or whatever the hell they are that come out of the ground, and they're pretty humongous, and just the scope of them and all, I remember thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, this is cool. Like, okay, this is what couldn't be done on the next gen. So again, just to kind of back up a little bit, at the start of this generation, I mentioned last episode, I wasn't completely blown away by the seventh generation to what I was before. But when I started playing something like this, I was like, oh, okay, there's that next gen power. That was still what I was thinking, right? Like, there's that next gen power. Okay, this can only be done on this system, right? So it wasn't as like in your face as it was in previous generations, but it was still there though. I say that just because eventually how the generations kind of the improvements were made in the next generations, right, and all started, we started getting more diminishing returns, right, and also, again, it was there, it was just a little bit smaller, but it was still definitely there in the seventh generation, because I did think that was pretty cool, though. And this series had like 3 games in it, but this is the only one that I played, and I do remember I liked it, at least back then, but yeah, Lost Planet. Let's see, and then we also had Saints Row. I remember playing this game, and I mean, it was kind of like a sort of like a Grand Theft Auto sort of game, and it had a bit, it also had like humor to it, but just kind of done in a different way. And I remember I had some fun with it, but something about it though, it just wasn't quite Grand Theft Auto though. But I mean, the series eventually became somewhat big. I mean, it's there was a lot of Saints Row games that came out. Actually, one somewhat recently too, right? Like maybe a couple of years ago or so, but. Yeah, I mean, I played it. I thought it was kind of funny, but not something that really left a lasting impact. And then there was also Just Cause. If you heard the Xbox in the background, I'm just turning something on. But there was Just Cause, and so this game you play, what's his name? Ramiro, I think, or Ricardo, I forgot. But you play some kind of like an agent of some sort, and you're on this sort of island setting, and you're just blowing shit up. I played a little bit of the first Just Cause game, and I thought it was fun. But I've heard that the later installments, I think particularly 3 is the one that I've heard it's really good. So this is a series that I do want to get into and play. They just look like a lot of fun, and just flying around in a parachute and just blowing a bunch of stuff up. It just seems like a lot of fun. But yeah, this is where the first one came out though, on the 360. Well, I might have come out on PC and maybe on previous generation. I don't quite recall, but the one that I just recall the release of was the 360 one because I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I know I played this game somehow. I don't know if it was a demo or I rented it, but yeah, I forget how I played some games back in the day. Just so I was trying to get my hands on just so many stuff in this, however I could back then. Let's see. But then there was also Dead Rising. So this is an original game here for the Xbox 360. And so this game was from Capcom. And in this game here, you play this photographer, Frank West. And so you end up in a mall that is just overrun by zombies, which is very much, inspired by, what is it? The Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead? One or the other, right? Where they're in a mall and there's a bunch of zombies. I mean, very much like that, right? But it was pretty cool. This is another game too, also where you felt a bit of that next gen power because I remember looking at like the character models and all. I was like, okay, they look pretty good and all, but nothing, too crazy. But then when you see all the zombies, right? Because that was one thing that I remember that I felt really impressed by this generation was like how many like characters or NPCs or whatever you can have on a screen. So for example, like in Cameo from last year, all the dragons that are in the sky, right? During the opening section, and then in Dead Rising, it just seemed like just as far as you can see, right? Just zombies and zombies, right? And all. And I thought that was really impressive how they could do that. So I did get into this game. It was more so that when a new generation comes out, when a new systems comes out, usually I try to like absorb a lot of games as I can, right? As I'm just trying to get into what the next generation is all about. And so at this time, I remember I really played this game quite a bit and beat it and all, as mainly for that reason, though, just because it was a next gen thing. In retrospect, though, and all, I like it. I don't mind the Dead Rising game, but it can be a little annoying too with some of the escort missions. But overall, I do like the concept, and it's a pretty good game to get into. But Splinter Cell also had a game, and I know that there was a few releases of this game because there was the ones that I think came out on the previous 6th gen, and then also this Xbox 360 one. So Splinter Cell Double Agent. I think there were like different games too. Like they weren't the same game. But I don't know much on this one. I just know that like I think you get put in prison. And like I said, I think I rented this game too also, but I don't recall a whole lot of it. I just remember that when I played it, I was like, no, I just don't feel it was as good as Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, which I thought was really excellent. But yeah, for me, this is sort of where the series started going downhill though. There might be some pretty decent games still there that came afterwards. I'm not too familiar with them. But we also got Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and it's sort of like a top-down sort of beat 'em up hack and slash action RPG, I guess you can say, where you're controlling all these Marvel characters, and so you can choose a team of 4, and then you can select between them on the fly, and they all have like their own unique moves. But otherwise, it is just kind of like a beat 'em up game, and I've actually been playing this game a little bit as with the release of Avengers Doomsday coming out this year. I am kind of starting to catch up on the movies again, and then get into some Marvel games and all. So I've been playing this game a little bit off and on, and it's pretty cool. The game has aged a bit as far as graphics goes, but it's still pretty cool though. It's got a pretty cool story so far from what I've played into it, and it's pretty fun overall. And yeah, this is because this came out on multiple systems too. But it came out on, I know it came out on the PlayStation 3, on the Xbox 360, on the previous consoles as well too. So it was all over the place. And the version that I'm playing now is one that was done on the PlayStation 4. Through backwards compatible on the PlayStation 5. But they've since delisted the game though, right? More than likely because of the Marvel license and all, which always kind of a bummer when it comes to these licensed games. But yeah, pretty cool game though, so far that I've been playing it. We had Call of Duty 3 also, and this one, I remember renting this game. I just don't recall a whole lot about it. It was like a military World War One, no, I'm sorry, World War Two shooter, but I don't remember much about it though. I don't think it was bad necessarily. I just don't recall much of it. But either way, though, came out this year though, and we had Prey, and now this game I do remember. It's this is a first person shooter, and it's got a very interesting premise where you're you take the role of Tommy. So he's a Native American living on his land, and so then the game starts out where you're in a bar talking to your girlfriend, who's the bartender there, and then your grandpa. And so then there's a little situation there too with some of the customers that are there that you end up getting in a fight with them. But then eventually it takes a turn as all of a sudden this UFO shows up and starts abducting you along with your grandpa and your girlfriend for what is probably one of the coolest intros ever in a video game. That whole little stretch right there is pretty awesome. And then the song that they put with the "Don't Fear the Reaper" from what is it, Blue Oyster Cult? It's absolutely amazing. I love that scene so much. And then what happens afterwards, as you're going through this alien spaceship, it's very much violent and gory to an extent, but just I mean, it really shifts gears on you, right, and all of what's going on. But overall, a pretty cool first-person shooter game. You get an interesting collection of weapons where they're very alien weapons. I mean, sometimes when you're holding a gun, you can see like the little alien tentacles and all kind of wrapping around your arm and all. It looks kind of weird, but it's very original, very cool, and yeah, I really enjoyed this game. It was one of the better games that I played on the Xbox 360 in this year that, otherwise I felt was a bit of a lackluster year, but it was still a pretty cool game, and I had a lot of fun with this game. But speaking of a lot of fun, also, there was Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. Now, I've never really been into like these tactical strategy military games. But for me to get into like these strategy games, kind of the same thing with like strategy RPGs. I like it more when they're a bit more streamlined in their controls and all. I guess nowadays as I'm getting older, I'm a bit of a dummy. I like things to be more streamlined, and that's kind of what this game gave me, though. And even back then, when I was younger, I was still apparently a bit of a dummy. But it's like the way you can control your squad. It was pretty simple, right? To give them the commands and all on where to go, and everything felt really solid, and the controls felt right. And yeah, I really got into this game. I thought it was really excellent, and I ended up beating the game. And what really sold me on the game, I was liking it at first, right, for the first few missions. But then you get into this one mission where I think you're out to try to save the Mexican president, and then like you're in a building or something like that, and all of a sudden it blows up, and you're like rushing to get him out, and then get out of there right as you're getting a bunch of enemies shooting at you. And I just thought that whole spectacle there was pretty amazing, and that's what sold me on the game. I was like, this game is pretty badass. And again, not the kind of game that I would normally get into, but definitely got hooked on this one, and I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun time. Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter. I never played the other ones after that, so I don't know. I can't speak on the quality of them. I just know that if you're into this kind of game and you've never played this one for some reason, highly recommend you get it. I'm pretty sure because I have it on my Xbox Series, so I'm pretty sure it's on there on backwards compatible still. So highly recommend you get this game. It's really cool if you're into those kind of games. But then the two standout games that I had for this year for the Xbox 360 was The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Gears of War. So The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, it was one of the first games that I saw that was being made for the 7th generation in magazines. Because I remember Game Informer had a spread on this. This would have been... it would have been, I think, in mid 2005, so before the Xbox 360 launch. So they had this big old spread about it on what the game was going to look like and all. And so I remember, again, it was like this PC RPG. I never got into Morrowind, so I wasn't too familiar with these games, but it looked pretty incredible, right? I was like, oh wow, this looks like an open world medieval RPG. I was like, I used to dream about games like this, right? And so it looked really impressive. And so it's a game that I had on my radar, right? That I wanted to see how it turned out. And sure enough, when it did, it was getting really rave reviews. reviews. People seem to really like it, and so I got this game, and yeah, just absolutely got engulfed in this game. It was just so. This was really also where I started saying like, okay, this is the seventh generation. This vast open world with this level of detail couldn't be done on the previous generation. And I mean, I was blown away by like the time when you come out of the sewer and then you start looking out into the open world. I was like, oh my God, I can go like pretty much anywhere. That's mind blowing. Of course, not everywhere, right? And all, because, eventually you'll hit a wall, right, so to speak, right, as far as how far you can go, but you can go pretty damn far, and just how detailed everything is and all, and then all the different side missions that you can do in between. And I remember just, I've never beaten this game, just because every time I play it, I just keep getting sucked into this overall world and the side quests and everything, and I just love living in this world. And even to this day, every now and then I'll pick it up, I'll try to do a mission here and there and all, and I'm just so fascinated by just the overall living world that this feels like, right, that you can inhabit in it while you play it, and truly stunning with incredible music. And the story for what it is pretty cool with the whole Oblivion Gates. I'll never forget this, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because this was where I was like, this is the next generation, right, where again, this is my first game that I'm playing of the Elder Scrolls game, right? And of like this kind of PC style game. And so I wasn't really familiar with these kind of games, and I didn't really know what the story was going to be all about and all. So I remember I'm playing the game. And so as you start going up that hill of, what's that city, Kavach, I think it's called. Okay, so if you know, right? So you're going up this hill, and then all of a sudden, when you start encountering the first Oblivion Gate. So then I'm going up it. I wasn't expecting this, and then all of a sudden, everything starts turning like hell on earth, right? And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so then you see the gate and you go in, and I was so confused by everything, right? Like, what, am I in a different world? Like, what is going on here? But I just remember like almost being scared a little bit, like, what is going on in this game? Like, it looks like hell. And I was just so amazed by that. And that's where I was definitely like, this game is cool. This is the next generation. Hell yeah, let's go. Right. And yeah, even to this day, I just always hold that time when I played that game there, and that stretch is just one of the coolest gaming experiences I ever had. But yeah, overall, incredible game. I know we got the new remaster that just came out recently, but this one is still really great to go back into, especially because it has the 60 frames per second patch that you can do on the Xbox Series X and S now. And so it looks really nice too also. So there's some, controversy between the remastered one, like if it's better than this one. I mean, if you happen to have Game Pass, right, you can try both of them on there, right, for free. Well, as long as you have that service, so you can test out which one you like more. But either way, though, just the game itself, Oblivion, it's truly incredible. And yeah, definitely you'll have a fun time with that one if you're into like these kind of, if you want like a really lengthy RPG to get lost in. This is definitely a good one for that. But then we had Gears of War. And so Gears of War was another game I was really anticipating, because they were showing, when they first started showing off videos, and they were showing how it was running on this Unreal Engine 3, which was going to be really highly detailed graphics and all. And so I remember I was just really looking forward to it. And then I remember when the trailer hit, where it has that song Mad World by Gary Jules, just gave it a certain tone, right? Because I'm expecting, like, any advertisement for this game to be very loud, bombastic, because it looked like that kind of shooter, and it is. But the trailer seemed to give it a bit of like humanity to it almost. Yeah, excuse me, was really impressed by it. Gears of War, just an excellent game, and still one of my favorite action. Well, the series overall, right? Because there would be multiple sequels that would come out after this. Just overall was really cool. And while this particular version, right, hasn't aged quite the best, because the graphics are really cool, right? At the time, the Unreal Engine 3, it could make some really gritty looking graphics, right? And just all the characters look really kind of bulky, almost comic booky and all. But it had a really cool look to it. Unfortunately, though, the frame rate really suffered on this one. So if you go back to the original one, right, it's a bit rough, right? But on the, if you have it on the Xbox Series X or S, there is a patch where you can run it at 60 frames per second. And so then it looks really good, right? So again, a lot of these games in this generation struggled with their frame rate, but on several of them, there's been ways to play it at 60 frames per second, whether if it was a patch that came out on the next, the newer consoles or on PC, they look really good still. Like they hold up really well. Like so this game had like a remaster, or like a, where it had like improved graphics on it, right? But just this particular version running at 60 frames per second looks pretty stunning still. So we were getting to the point now where even, from some games in the sixth generation still hold up really well, but some games, maybe not so much. Like if you're a brand new gamer, right, and all, you're looking at some of the graphics, you're like, that looks a little bit too blocky and all. I think that from the seventh generation, especially if you can bump it up in a way to 60 frames per second, the graphics hold up incredibly well still. And so, for example, with this one here, but yeah, Gears of War though, just it really popularized the hide behind cover, the duck and cover mechanic. We had seen already that in some games before, like what was that game, Win Back, and I think maybe there was another one, but this game really perfected it though, made it a core gameplay element, and was just a lot of fun because the firefights now felt a lot more real, right? Where you're ducking and shooting instead of just kind of running around like an idiot, right? Trying to hide behind a wall and all, and that didn't always work as well, but just made it really fun. Had a really cool setting to it. The characters, Marcus Phoenix, Cole, Baird, um, and Dom. I mean, I love those guys, man. It's just they really felt like almost like you had a little bit of a brotherhood going on there with them, and the banter between them is just awesome, and definitely gave you a feel of like the Aliens or Predator movies with, not only the enemies that you're fighting, but also just the big machismo sort of kind of tough guy attitude to the game, and it's just a lot of fun. And yeah, these games are awesome. I really enjoyed these games, and this is a hell of a first game, right, to start off on this series. And yeah, just a lot of fun. If for some reason you haven't played the Gears of War games and you want to like a cool action games and all, this is some of the best out there. So highly recommend it. But then we get into the Wii and the PlayStation 3. So the Wii, so you read my little thing, right, that I read last year from the letter that I wrote, right? So when I wrote that letter again that I ended the last episode with, that was right before they announced what the actual revolutionary controller was, which is basically the Wiimote that we know it now. And so I remember when they announced that, I actually I had a lot of curiosity for the Wii. Because I was like, because I really felt, right? I was like, Nintendo is really innovative with what they do. And I know that they're going to make it work, right? And all to make it really revolutionary, with how you're going to play the games. And so then eventually the commercials started coming out with like those two Japanese guys going around house to house, right? Would you like to play? And I was like, oh man, I wish they would come over to my house. Because I was interested in the Wii, right? I had a lot of high hopes for it for some reason. And, but then it started coming out, right? And all the specs of the system were only going to be, it was basically going to be pretty much a GameCube with slightly beefed up specs, but not much. So, I mean, really, when I look at the Wii, I'm looking at the GameCube, really, right? There was no game really that I can think of on the Wii that made me say, oh yeah, this is graphically speaking, right? That this is much better than what the GameCube could do outside of its widescreen that it could do, right? Outside of that, I can't really think of one. But I was really banking on this controller to really give you a unique experience. And so sure enough, at first, I mean, it kind of was, I bought the system. Oh God, let's see. Cause I got it, I didn't get it at launch, but I got it a little bit after that. I was lucky to get it somewhat, within, I would say maybe within like a month or two after it released. I remember I was able to get my hands on a Wii, and so I remember, I'm checking out, the, oh God, I can't think, Wii Sports. And I was like, okay, graphics are, definitely, not as good as, what's currently out right now. But it was fun, right? But then that's where I was thinking, I was like, okay, this whole Wiimote thing, it is what it is exactly as they said, but it's also, I guess, just not that revolutionary either. I mean, it kind of is, right? The way you can, mimic the motions, right, with the Wiimote, it's kind of cool, I guess. But it was fun, I guess. I just, at the time, I never really had anybody to play multiplayer with, so I never got to experience that about it. It was interesting, I'll say that, right? And so I was like, but at the very least, I thought, okay, so with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, they're going to give me the really cool core, like the hardcore games. With the Wii, I'm sure Nintendo's going to do some really fun, innovative stuff. And so my thought at the time was like, it's gonna give me a much different experience, which is cool, right? Because that way I have a lot more variety in the games that I can play. At least that was my thought at the time with the Wii. but then let's see, I never really got into a lot of the other launch games that came out because it was like Red Steel, which is like a first person shooter game where you can also use a sword and you can use the, like hand motions, right, to swing the sword. And really what it is, I started noticing is that when you swing, the swinging mechanism, right? So it's not like it's like, like it's going to perfectly mimic your arm motion. It's really like you can just really flick your wrist and then it's almost like a button prompt, right? So it's not like a fluid motion mimicking your arm movement. It's just simply like, oh, okay, I'm swinging my sword now because you wave the Wiimote, and that's all it is, right? And I think a lot of us started catching on to that. We're like, oh, well, this isn't anything really too revolutionary, I guess. But I will say though, the game that I did get into the Wii though at first was The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. Now I was gonna get this game regardless, right? Because it also came out. It came out on the Wii as a launch title. On November 19th, I think I said earlier. But then it came out on the GameCube a few weeks later. And I ended up getting both versions. I remember that. I think just because I wanted to test them out. But ultimately, the version that I got into was the Wii one. And I did think it was kind of cool though, right? That you can swing your sword and all. And then also the aiming for a bow and arrow. I thought that was actually really fluid. And so that's the version that I got into and played all the way through. And I will say this for, because that was my concern, right? Is the Wii Mo going to be just a gimmick, or is it really for like a long action RPG style game? Is it really going to make it a very immersive experience? And I will say that with my time playing the Twilight Princess on the Wii, when I played it all the way through, I was really impressed with it. It wasn't quite the revolutionary experience that I thought it was, but it was still pretty fun to play. And I think what really sold me on that experience was actually at the very end I'll just say with the last fight that you have with, I think we all know who the last boss is in any Zelda game, but that whole sword fight sequence I thought was actually really cool. And I remember after I beat the game, I was looking at the Wiimote. I was like, thank you. That was actually a unique experience. I don't know if it's still going to be my preferred way to play that game, but I just know that at the time when I played it, I really got into it, and probably the best experience that I had playing any game on the Wii. Because as I'll just say it right now, right, and I didn't really get into it too much afterwards. I got a handful of games for it, but I never really got too far into it. Like I never played like the Mario games on there and all, and it was just really The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess because I really wanted to play that game. And then after that, it just kind of collected dust for me. Well, no, I wouldn't say collected dust. It was more because of the Wii Shop, but we'll get in more into that, right, as the time is right for it. Um, but actually, I don't know if it's no. I think they start talking about it in the next year, right? Let me double check actually. Oh no, actually it looks like okay, yeah, so it was released, so it did launch alongside the Nintendo Wii. So okay, so let's talk about it here before I end up forgetting on it. So with the Wii Shop, this is actually really cool because it we're already a few generations into the video game history here, right? And so there was like this craving to try to go back and play some of the older games, but it was starting hard to get, right? Because again, we're at this point we're already noticing like, okay, it's a little much to try to have a whole bunch of systems plugged into your TV, right? I mean, I know some people dedicate rooms to that and all, and that's awesome, but not everyone can have the space for that. And so the Wii Shop was pretty cool because you can download games onto your Wii from older generations and have them there to play. And they even released like an actual control pad for that specifically. So let me read some stuff here about the Wii Shop here, because this is actually one of the things that I really used the Wii for a lot, and I really appreciated it for it. But the Wii Shop channel was a digital distribution service for the Wii video game console. The service allowed users to purchase and play additional software for the Wii called channels, including exclusive branded WiiWare games. So those were like, almost like think like indie games, right? Specifically made for the Wii. But let's see. And games from prior generations of video game consoles, marketed with the Virtual Console brand. The Wii Shop channel launched on November 19th, 2006, and was the place to buy additional Wii channels. Most of the Wii Shop channels functions were discontinued in January 30th of 2019. Succeeded by the Wii Shop. Okay, so yeah, it starts going over later stuff, so I won't get into that now. But the channel's theme music has become popular and well received on the internet and is often used in internet memes. Yes, yes, I love that. It was just so peaceful to go into the Wii shop or the virtual console, and you get this little song playing, and it's like peaceful almost. It's like strangely nostalgic even at the time, even though it was like the first time you were hearing it. But yeah, let's see. So I'm curious that what came out at first, I guess. Because it eventually had like you can get games on it from the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Nintendo 64, and then eventually also the Sega Genesis, Master System, TurboGrafx 16, MSX, Neo Geo, and the Commodore 64. So they all started from like at about 500 points to 1200, which I think amounted out to like $5 or $10 or so, if I recall right. I forgot. But let's see. What were the first? I mean, I'm pretty sure the first game because they would like trickle out with games, kind of like the way they do now with the Nintendo Switch Online service, where they would just trickle out a few games here and there. The thing though back then though is that they would trickle them out a lot faster though, and so you were constantly like it was. I want to say that I think that I could be wrong on this, but I want to say that there was a specific time where you could expect a Nintendo game to come out, or games on the Wii Shop, anyways. And then on the system itself, where you insert this, there's like a blue light that can light up, and I think that light would light up whenever there was some kind of an update. And so I think for some people it was like, because I never knew it back then, it's just things that I've heard afterwards that people were talking about how they were always excited to see that light because it's like, oh wait, did something come out on the eShop? But I remember and I've already mentioned this a little bit before in previous episodes, but this is where I got into a lot of like Nintendo games that I didn't get into back in the day. So things like this is where I first beat Final Fantasy VI. This is where I first beat The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is also where I first beat, like, I think Contra 3 and Super Castlevania 4 and games that I never really could own back in the day. Because again, I didn't have the Super Nintendo back then. And what other games that I think I was it also Castlevania Rondo of Blood? I think that's where I first played this. But there was a lot of games that this is the first time that I beat, and so it was all thanks to the Wii Shop, and I thought it was great. I remember I racked up a whole bunch of games on this, and just yeah, it was definitely one of the cooler features of the Nintendo Wii. And so honestly, like I said, right, the main game that I played on the Wii was Twilight Princess. And then after that, I never really got into a lot of the other, like I never got Mario Kart. I never got the Super Mario Galaxy games, but I got a whole bunch of games on the Wii Shop though, right? And that was kind of my main usage for the Wii at that time. Because again, this was back in 2006 and forward, before we had all these cool little emulation devices that we have now, right? Where I tend to play more of my retro games now. But yeah, it was, I really appreciated the Wii Shop. It was definitely spent a lot of hours playing games on that there. But that's what I got for the Wii. Let's see. So now let's get into the PlayStation 3. So the PlayStation 3, so was it, I don't know if it was this year or last year, right? But I think well, it was where they had that really botched E3 show where the whole, what does it say? If you haven't seen this, it's funny. But basically, so Sony, right? Sony with the PlayStation and the PlayStation 2 seemed unstoppable. But with the PlayStation 3, they kind of started fumbling a bit. And there was for a few different reasons, right? Because the PlayStation 3, Sony really got it into their heads that they were just unstoppable, right? And so they came out with this behemoth of a system, the PlayStation 3, which was a bit difficult to develop for because they used like this certain graphical style, like the Cell engine, or I forgot what the hell it was called. But it was... it could do really good graphics. It's just that it was a bit hard to program for. So kind of like with the Saturn, right? But Sony's was pretty confident saying that, our developers will figure it out, how to use the system and really tap into the power of it. And so they loaded up the system with, a really powerful at the time, right, graphical engine, even though it was hard to program for. Had a Blu-ray player, which was kind of a big deal. And also had all kinds of like things that you can put into it, like storage media and all kinds of stuff. And it was a bit overkill. And it was also backwards compatible with the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 1 originally. And so it's called a fat model now. And that model there was highly sought after because with that model, like, ever since like the PlayStation 5 came out, right, they were talking about how if you can find that fat model, which you can play PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 games, and then you get a PlayStation 5, which is backwards compatible with the PlayStation 4, then those are the only two PlayStations you need, the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 5 for that reason. The only thing though is that fat model tends to be it tends to have a lot of hardware issues as well too, and so there's a lot of people that have come out right on ways you can mod the system and all to prolong its life. So just kind of know going into that, if you're a hardware collector and you want to go back to that original model, look up some videos as far as for like, I think it's like a battery that you change in it and all to prolong the life of it, something to that effect. But yeah, it was a lot, right? And then the price of it too also was considerable. Um, because it was let me see what it launched with. Um, okay, yeah. So this was because this was pretty expensive at the time, right when they announced it, but it was at launch. So on November 11th, at least here in the United States. So there was a 20 gigabyte model for $499, and then a 60 gigabyte model for $599. So it had all the bells and whistles on the system and all, and it was really expensive, right? And so that was like, whoa, yikes! That's a bit pricey, right? And where the Wii was like, I think $199. What was the Wii priced at? Let's see. And I think that's part of the reason why also the Wii sold so well, because it was the cheaper option. Now it's funny, we were talking about that, where nowadays we've talked about where Nintendo's at now, but at the time the Wii was a cheaper option. It was $249 for the Wii. Um, and let's see. And then for the Xbox, I want to say I think it was $359 or $350. Oh no, okay, so let's see. Okay, so the Xbox 360 had a few different versions. So there was a core version, which was $299, which you don't get the hard drive. But then there was an Xbox Premium, which came with the 20 gigabyte hard drive at $399. So $399, right? It was still $100 less than the lower version of the PlayStation 3. So the PlayStation was met with some criticism for that as well too. And then also on the show too, also there's like this demonstrator playing a game. It was like the samurai game. It was one of the launch games. It was Genji, I believe. It was pretty unforgettable. Or I'm sorry, pretty forgettable. But it was, they're like, yeah, you participate in battles and real battles in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab. Okay, there was giant enemy crabs back in the day, but oh yeah, Sony kind of messed up this whole. They didn't mess it up completely, right? But it just seemed like you got the feeling like they were just extremely arrogant, right? Like, hey, we can do no wrong. But their sales originally wasn't horrible, but it wasn't the best either. And so it was, and so then when you started playing the games, because the launch lineup too also wasn't anything really to write home about, and so you're like, well, where's this big power of the PlayStation 3? Now we knew that a lot of games were going to be coming out eventually, but that was going to be still a little ways out, right? Because they had already announced like Metal Gear Solid 4, Gran Turismo, a Tekken game, I believe, and then they had that really cool demo of which I didn't know it until more recently, but the demo that they showed. Final Fantasy VII, the first little stretch there where, it shows Aerith and then the camera pans out to see Medgar and then eventually comes back down, right, where you see Cloud jumping off the train. I didn't know they made a whole demo of that running on PlayStation 3 graphics. So if you didn't know, check it out. It's actually pretty cool. And so immediately people were like, what, are we getting a Final Fantasy VII remake? Not quite. It was just a demo, right? Just to kind of show off what the PlayStation 3 can do. So, God, I would have lost my shit if I knew that back then, but I didn't. I completely missed out on that back then. And it wasn't until more recent years, right, that I found out that they did that. But we still knew that games were coming, right? Like we knew, I think Final Fantasy 13 I think it was like the Project Novelist Chris's project or whatever the hell that was. I think that already been announced, but so we knew another Final Fantasy game was going to come out and all, and so there was games that were going to come out on it. We knew. It's just that initially at the launch, I mean, the only games that I can think that were really worthwhile getting were Resistance: Fall of Man, which was from Insomniac Games, who they did the Spyro games and the Ratchet and Clank games, and that game is pretty cool, where it takes place like in this alternative universe where in World War II we were not only fighting the Nazis but also aliens, and it's got a pretty cool premise. And I did like Resistance: Fall of Man. I thought it was pretty cool, but the game itself But I remember looking at the graphics. I'm like, this is not much better than like Black, the game that I mentioned earlier. And so I was a bit disappointed with it, right? But I was like, but the game is fun though, still, right? But I was still like, where's the power of this PlayStation 3? Where's like these high frame rates, which again, this generation wasn't known for having high frame rates. Um, and Ridge Racer 7. I remember getting that. Now, that game was at 1080p, 60 frames per second. So I was like, oh, okay, so there is potential here, right? But that's a racing game, right? Which is different than, say, like trying to do like a action game or an adventure game running at 60 frames per second, at least this early on in the generation. But the PlayStation 3, though, I didn't get it until like the spring of 2007 or so. But it didn't have the best launch. But I think people still bought into it because, again, PlayStation already had a big name for itself, and so we were expecting that eventually we would get the good stuff on it. It was just going to take a while, and it kind of did a little bit. But the cool thing was though that this is where I started, getting into Blu-rays. So a little bit about the whole HD, DVD, and Blu-ray battle. Um, so Blu-rays were mainly from Sony, and HD DVDs they were from Toshiba, right? Was it Toshiba? Okay, so I'm just going to read a few things here from Skynet. So, Blu-ray run the high definition optical disc format war from 2006 to 2008 against HD DVDs due to higher storage capacity. So, 25 to 50 gigabyte versus 15 to 30 gigabyte. Stronger support, studio support, and inclusion in the PlayStation 3. While both offer 1080p resolution via blue lasers, Blu-ray's superior capacity and adoption by major retailers like Walmart and Netflix secured its dominance, again causing Toshiba to abandon HD DVDs in 2008. Um, yeah, so basically that was it. And so the Xbox 360 had like an add-on that you can buy where it could play the HD DVDs on it, where the PlayStation 3 came in with a built-in Blu-ray player already on it. And so they were probably banking on it, right? That it was going to give the PlayStation 3 success, like the way the DVD player built into the PlayStation 2 did. Not quite as much, but I still feel to an extent it did. And because Blu-rays, I mean, DVDs weren't out there for that long, right? And then now we're into Blu-rays and all. But I do remember, again, I'm a bit of a movie nut too, also, right? I almost feel like starting something on talking movies. I'm just such a geek when it comes to like games and movies, but I'm a big movie nut too, also. And so back then, so I've talked about before, right, where I wanted to get like the best possible TV and sound that I could for my budget at the time. So I can watch, not only play games, but also watch movies. And so I remember I bought Superman Returns and X-Men 3, The Last Stand. I know, not the best movies, but, I bought those movies there and all. And I remember watching them in Blu-ray. I was like, oh, wow, this does look a lot better, right? In high definition. Because eventually I got a LCD TV. It was like a Vizio 32-inch LCD TV. And so was experiencing like, actual high definition on not only games, but on movies. And the whole high definition thing, I already talked about it last time. But yeah, it was pretty stunning, though, to look at. Not only, again, for games, but movies. Because I remember watching the X-Men 3 quite a bit just because I like the clarity of it. Not so much for the movie itself. I kept rewinding the scene where... because the scene where in the halfway through, if you've never seen the movie, I mean, it's where I'll just say where... Charles Xavier, Wolverine, and Storm go to this house where Jean Grey is in, along with Magneto and Juggernaut, and some other villains there too. And the whole fight scene that plays out there, I still think that scene is actually pretty cool. But I remember watching that scene over and over again. I was like, damn, this looks so clear. But yeah, but ultimately Blu-rays ended up winning, right? And some part of that was, because of the PlayStation 3, right? Even though it didn't initially sell incredibly well, it still sold pretty well enough and all, right? But yeah, I remember I felt that the PlayStation 3 was a bit clunky in its interface also too, and I was like, ooh, I don't know about this PlayStation 3. It seems like a lot. Eventually the system really came through, but at this initial point though, I played the Xbox 360 and the Wii more, just because I felt that they had better games, and also I just like the interfaces of them better. I just remember I hated it felt like on the PlayStation 3 the crossbar, like it was really laggy. The downloads that it would do on the game was really laggy also, and just something about it I was like, oh, I was just kind of put off by it. But But like I said, I'll talk more about the PlayStation 3 in the years to come. But and like I said, because I didn't get it this year. But Resist and Fall of Man, though, that was a pretty decent game, and eventually would get some pretty cool sequels too. But yeah, but otherwise, outside of the novelty of like playing that game and watching Blu-ray movies, I didn't really use my PlayStation 3 at home much at when I first initially got it though. But that's 2006 in a nutshell there. Hopefully, again, that gave you a little bit of nostalgia. It's funny because, we're getting closer to the more modern times, but 2006 still feels so far away, though, still. So, kind of crazy how, time has gone by and just how much technology has changed too, also. But that was a fun little retrospect going back on that year, as these years always interesting, where it's not the best year as far as like software wise and all, but it's exciting though, because we get new hardware, a new generation, and it's always the thought of like what's to come, right, is always very exciting. But that's what I got here for this one. Hope you have an excellent week, and hopefully I'll see you back here on next Sunday, where we look at 2007. And 2007 is also another year that goes down as one of the greatest of all time. I will just say that this is the year that the seventh generation really started, as the kids say, cooking. There was a lot of great stuff that came out in 2007, so kind of excited to talk about that year. But we will see you in the next one. Have a good one.